Hey, my name is Justin. I sell stuff part-time on eBay, and I answer people's questions about eBay here on my YouTube channel. Over the last year, I've answered a ton of questions. I decided to compile all of those, or many of those, maybe not all of them, but many of those questions into one single mega video, which is what you're going to watch right now. 3 hours worth. Can you make it all the way through? I doubt it, but if you want to, here it is. Enjoy. Daryl asks, how do you store your stock? My stock is getting to be a bit over everywhere in my garage. Good question. I have a pretty simple system set up for inventory where I have probably 15 or so wire shelves that I got at Lowe's. Usually I wait till they go on sale, pay about $90 a piece, and I've got those in my basement. And then on those shelves, I've got banker boxes, and each of these shelves are labeled. And so this is shelf A, this is shelf B, this is shelf C, and so on. And then each level of those shelves has a number. So this is A3, A4, A5, and then on those shelves are banker boxes. And so this is like A3A because it's box A, A3B, it's box B. And so that's the general system. I put stuff in those banker boxes, but I also just put stuff directly on the shelves. And when I store something, I then go back to my inventory management system and I define where it's stored. So I'll put, if it goes in the A3A box, I'll put A3A. And then when it sells, my inventory management system will pop up and show me that this is where it's stored. So pretty simple setup. I like the banker boxes because they're relatively small. I used to have big tubs, plastic bins. I found that they were too big. They held too much stuff and it was kind of overwhelming to have to dig through all sorts of stuff. So I like that the banker boxes are smaller. It means I don't have as much stuff in each box, and this system works pretty well. I store a little over 1,000 items in stock at any given time, and it takes up maybe 100 square feet or so, maybe a little bit bigger than that, 200 square feet. All right, Dutta asks, do you believe the selling concept of selling via the slow dime instead of the fast nickel is best when selling part-time? Right, so it's like an old adage like slow nickel or fast dime. Do you want to wait a long time to make more money, or do you want to sell things faster for a lower amount? And I would say that really depends on your own selling style. It also depends on other variables like how much space you have to store your inventory. As you saw, I have a pretty big space to store inventory, and I'm not in any real hurry to sell my inventory, and so I don't mind. Sometimes my stuff takes 6 months, 12 months even to sell. That's not really a big deal to me because it's not taking up a lot of space. But if you're selling out of your apartment, for example, and you're keeping all of your inventory in your closet, and that starts to get overwhelming, you would probably be more careful about what you buy and the sell-through rate of what you buy and how quickly you sell it. And so you may price things a little bit lower to make it sell quicker. And so it really depends on a lot of variables like that. I'm fine with the slow nickel approach instead of the fast dime. Is that it? What is it? Fast dime, slow nickel? Slow dime, fast nickel. I'm more of a slow... I've already forgotten it. What is it? I'm more of a slow dime person, in between the slow dime and fast nickel. I don't know. I'm probably saying those things wrong. Slow dime, fast nickel, slow dime. You know what I mean. Angie asks, how far are you willing to go for garage sales? I don't know. First base, maybe sometimes second base, depending on my mood. No, I'm just kidding. I really don't go too far for garage sales. I tend to stick around my area just because I know that area really well. And there's some main roads that I go down that branch off into neighborhoods where there's always garage sales. So I really don't have to drive very far. I find the further that I go, the more time I spend actually driving instead of going to garage sales. Ambitious Seeds asks, your prices are higher than mine. Makes me feel like I'm pricing things way too cheap. And on top of that, I was doing free shipping. Dumb of me, no more. I'm charging a flat rate $4.99 and also increasing my prices. $10 profits ain't cutting it no more. I did that for the algorithm, but now I feel like I should aim for $20 profits. What do you think? Well, you can't really pick your profits. Your items are worth a certain amount regardless. And so, if you try to price your items so high to get a $20 profit, you may price yourself out of what a buyer is going to pay for it. And so these are the types of calculations you want to do prior to buying something to resell, is to understand, okay, what type of return am I going to get on it? And is it worth me making the investment to buy it? You don't want to make that decision after you've already listed it because like I said, you're going to price things higher than what the market will sustain for that particular item. So that said, kind of how I think about pricing is I do look at the active market value. I look at the sold market value. I tend to price my things on the high end of the sold market value, so usually just above average. Because I usually expect to send out some 10% off offers, and I'm happy to do that. But that's sort of where I price things, is a little bit on the high end of the average. All right, Carlos asks, my biggest struggle is when someone bids or buys an item and never pays for days. Am I doing something wrong? I'd say the only thing that you're doing wrong there is not selling as buy it nows, and it sounds like you're selling as auctions. It's a big reason why I don't sell as auctions, is because people just don't pay. And so for 99.9% of everything I sell it as a buy it now. Auctions are only good if 3 conditions are met. If it has low supply, if it has high demand, and if it has an unknown market value. If all three of those conditions are good, then I list it as an auction, but I'd say 1 in every 500 listings is an auction. So I've got a whole other video on that. I'll link it down below. But that's the only thing you're doing wrong probably is by listing as an auction. Instead, you want to list it as a buy it now. And then you don't have to worry about whether people are going to pay or not. They're required to pay. All right, Faith in Believing asks, does eBay automatically send you the form you need for tax time? It's a really good question. There's a lot of confusion around taxes for eBay, for resellers. I'll preface this by saying I'm not an expert. This is not tax advice. I recommend you talk to a CPA. I have a CPA, and it's some of the best money I spend every year because they're the experts. They can tell me exactly what to do, and I'm happy to pay for them to do that. The way it works is that the IRS requires companies like eBay to submit how much money a seller makes if they meet a certain threshold. For last year, that threshold was $20,000. And so what that means is if you sell over $20,000 in gross sales on the platform, eBay is going to report that directly to the IRS on your behalf. And they will also send you the tax forms necessary to include that on your taxes. They're called 1099s. That's the tax form. However, they're just required by law to do that if they meet that threshold. You still have to pay taxes on any income that you generate, regardless of whether eBay reports it. And so even if you sell only a couple $100s worth of stuff, you're still required by law to report that as income, assuming it is income. And so whether eBay sends you a 1099 or not, whether you meet that threshold does not mean whether you pay taxes or not. You have to pay taxes on any income you generate, no matter what the level. So that threshold is changing though. And so the IRS a couple of years ago announced that the new threshold was going to be $600, meaning if you sold over $600 worth of gross sales on eBay or any other platform, eBay would be required to send that 1099 to you and to report that income to the IRS. And obviously that's a pretty big change between 20,000 and 600, but they kind of pumped the brakes on that and they did not implement that change. And while they have not announced it yet, I think they have said on their website, and I'll show it right here, that they plan next year for 2024, so when you do your taxes in 2025 for the year 2024, that the threshold is not going to be 20,000, it's going to be 5,000, so a lot less. And again, this doesn't mean all of a sudden you need to start paying taxes on your income. You have to pay taxes on your income anyway. It just means that they're going to report it on your behalf if you sell over $5,000 worth. And so that's when eBay is going to automatically send you those tax forms if you sell above that amount. If you sell below that amount, you still have to report that income. You just have to do it yourself, and eBay's not going to do it for you. So this is the biggest reason why, even if you're a small seller, you want to be keeping good records of your business, because eBay is just going to report the gross sales amount. They're just going to say, oh yeah, you sold $17,000. And so that's an additional $17,000 of income. You got to pay taxes on that. But what you need to do is you need to report to the IRS, while I did sell $17,000, that's not all income because you have expenses, right? It costs you money to run your business. And so you get to write off all of the expenses for running your business. And so all the platform fees that you pay eBay, you can write that off. And so right there, that's like 10 to 15% of that $17,000 as an example gets cut off as income because those are business expenses. Also, that your cost of goods, how much you paid for the inventory that you sold, that's another write-off. There's tons of write-offs. I'm not going to go through all of them right here. You want to report accurately all of your expenses to reduce that total gross income so it's not all being taxed, because that's not all income for you. So it's really important to keep track of your numbers. No matter what level you are as a seller, you need to be doing it. It looks like the rate is going to change in 2024 from 20,000 to 5,000. I would expect it to go all the way down to 600 in terms of when eBay will report income on your behalf. All right, so we got a lot of questions about Flipwise too, so we'll burn through those really quick. Love to Read asks, is Flipwise fiscally wise, I see what you did there, for a part-time seller who makes only $300 to $500 per month? So good question. Should I be using Flipwise if I'm a small seller? So my short answer is it's really not all that necessary to have an automated record-keeping solution if your business is really small, because it's pretty easy to keep manual records if you're only selling a few things. But this is part of why we introduced a free plan. And so if you have under 25 listings in your store, you can use Flipwise for free. But as soon as you go over that amount, and we picked 25 because in my experience, that's when record keeping starts to get a little bit crazy, is if you start to have more than a couple dozen listings and sales under your belt, then it just takes a lot of time to keep all your data in order and be ready for tax time. It's really really up to you. It's really a matter of like how you value your time. If you can keep records well enough for taxes manually at the scale that you're doing, keep doing that. But if it's taking you a lot of time, you may find that using an automated solution like Flipwise is a better use of that time. So you should really decide whether it's fiscally responsible to pay for a platform like that, based on how much time you spend keeping good records. If you're not keeping records at all, I would definitely recommend that you automate it. That way it just happens in the background, and then come tax time, you can pop in there and pull it all out and report on it. But that's what I would recommend. Kind of up to you, but good question. All right, the next one is, does Flipwise track full shipping expenses, label and material, or label shipping expenses only? So it tracks both. So it'll automatically pull in all of your shipping costs, assuming you buy your labels on eBay. And then it also allows you to track all of your material costs and other general business expenses. And so you can log things like packing material or boxes, and you can associate that with products in your inventory. And so you can really track both of those. Justin, does Flipwise consider a sell similar relist as a new listing, or when eBay relists after 30 days? So the way that Flipwise handles ending and relisting is it groups all of your listings together for the same item. And so when you end and relist, we didn't want to have to make you enter in your acquisition data every time you end and relist. And so Flipwise will give you a full historical view of every end and relist that you do for a single product. And so you enter your acquisition data once, and then anytime you end and relist, you'll see that on the product's timeline, and it connects all those listings together for the same product. And so inside of Flipwise, though, we don't treat a relist as a new product. And so we give you little stats on there that say how many listings you do per day. And we made the deliberate choice to not include relists on there because relists, in my opinion, are not as valuable as brand new listings of brand new products. And so we really want to encourage people to do new listings entirely. And so from a reporting standpoint, we do not consider relists as new listings. Last Flipwise question was, right now my membership will be the monthly $19.99 and up to 499 items. I'm growing my eBay store. When I reach 500 listings, will I be able to easily switch to the next membership? So yeah, when you use Flipwise, you don't actually pick a plan. We calculate the size of your store, and then we automatically put you in the plan that is appropriate for the size of your store. And then month to month, every time you're set for renewal, if you keep your membership, we check and see what your store size is. And if it has grown, then we bump you up to a higher plan. Or if it shrinks, we bump you down to a lower plan. So all of that happens in the background. You don't have to do anything. If we do bump you up to a higher plan, we let you know beforehand, before you're charged a different amount. And so you don't have to actually pick a different plan or move up or down. It'll do it all for you. All right, we got a couple of questions around offers. Greeting Things asked, do you get offended when someone makes an offer less than half of your asking price? I do. I probably shouldn't, but I do. So I don't use a whole lot of best offers. I usually don't turn best offers up on my inventory because I don't like to advertise that I'm willing to take less. I think that kind of starts negotiations off on the wrong foot if you say, hey, I want $100 for it, but I'm willing to take less. So personally, I just don't turn best offers on for many things. I do send offers out a lot, and sometimes you do get counter offers that are low. And for the items that I do have best offers on, I usually don't put a minimum offer on there either. I probably should. That would make more sense. And sometimes you do get lowball offers. I just tend to ignore them or decline them right away. And so it's just part of doing business. I try not to take it personally, but I can see how it does feel like a little offensive when someone's trying to lowball you on something. All right, Eddie asks, what are your thought process when it comes to considering offers from buyers? I seem to be turning most of them down, but I feel I may be too attached to what I paid for the item and the perceived value of it. So that's definitely a thing, right? Where you just feel like this is my item. It's worth some money. You can't give me less for it. It's really good to try to detach yourself from that. Like I said, I don't use offers a whole lot. And when I do use offers, I just consider like how long it's been listed. If something's been listed for 6 months and I haven't really got a bunch of interest on it and it's an offer that is, respectable, then yeah, sometimes I'll just accept it or I'll counter. I don't have a real strong thought process just because it's just not something I do a whole lot when I'm selling is turn best offers on. I do send out a lot of offers though to watchers, and I don't have a real strategy there other than to about once a day or every 2 days, I pop in there and send a 10% offer to everyone. I do have a pretty low success rate with that, but I still do it every day or every other day. All right, Gardenolly asks, when you sell a bunch of items in a short amount of time, can you go over how you ship? Not the packaging, but getting it to the post office or UPS drop-off. Do you schedule pickups from your home, or do you just pile it all up in the car and make a trip or two a week? Yeah, so we ship every day, Monday through Friday. And so we also go to the post office every day, Monday through Friday. And so our post office is pretty close and conveniently located from our house. And it's just a part of our routine, right? Wake up in the morning, get stuff shipped, go and drop it off at the post office while we're out doing other stuff. And so we do that Monday through Friday. It's not a big deal. We used to do pickups. I started to get a little bit self-conscious about doing pickups. And so you can go to the USPS website and say, schedule a pickup. It's free as long as you schedule it for when your mail carrier comes to drop off the mail. But I was starting to do like 5, 10, 15 packages per time. And I just felt a little self-conscious doing that. And so I stopped doing it. Now we just take our packages to the post office every day. What the flip did I buy asks, I see you have some hats listed. What's your process for cleaning hats before you list them? So my process there is to not buy hats that are dirty mostly. So if I find a hat and it's dirty, I'll usually pass on it unless it's a really good hat, like above $30 or so. And sometimes I do buy hats that are dirty and because they are worth a little bit more money. I don't mind investing a little bit more time into cleaning them. Typically what I do is I soak them in like a water and OxyClean mix, and that usually cleans it up. I also have one of those weird devices that you put in your dishwasher and wash your hat that way. It works pretty well. I'm always a little afraid to use that though with like a high dollar hat. And so I think I've only used that once and it worked out okay. But usually just soaking it in water and OxyClean works pretty well. But again, when I'm outsourcing, I consider things like, will this require a lot of time for me to clean when I'm deciding whether to buy it or not? And so I will only buy something if it requires a lot of cleaning, if the value of it is extra high. And for hats, that is typically not the case. Andrea asks, what does Andrea ask? Andrea asks, new reseller here, have been doing it for about a month, have 50 plus items posted and have sold 10. No feedback from buyers yet. I'm starting with clothes only for now, low risk, and clothes won't break in the mail. They won't. I have items I plan to sell in the future that should bring in $200 plus. How many sales and feedback should I have before listing higher priced items? So good question. It's definitely a good idea to wait a little while before and establish your seller account before you start selling really high value items. eBay has some automated fraud protection where if you just sign up for a seller account and you sell really high end stuff right away, that might send some flags and your account might get banned. I've talked to several people that's happened to. So you definitely, if you're just getting started, you do want to sell at a slower pace and some lower value items. So that's a really good move on your part. It does kind of suck wanting to establish yourself, but not getting any feedback. What you can do as a seller even is start to buy some of your supplies off of eBay, like boxes or shipping materials, packing materials, things like that, tape. You'll get feedback as a buyer in that regard. And that'll just give you some numbers next to your account, some feedback numbers, which is a good thing to have. But to answer your question directly, I would probably get at least a dozen or so sales under your belt and maybe 5 to 10 pieces of feedback before I started to really dig into some higher value inventory like that. So at least a half dozen or a dozen and a handful of feedback I think would be a good place to shoot for. 817 Thrifter asked, do you vacuum seal clothing like when you sell a lot of multiple pairs of pants? No, I don't. I don't vacuum seal anything. I do put all of my clothes into a poly bag and then I squeeze that poly bag. I get all the air out of it. And so it's kind of like vacuum sealing, but not quite as good. And I really only usually sell one clothing piece at a time. So it's not an issue to have many pieces that I really need to cram into a single box. But that's how I handle it, is just a poly bag and getting the air out of it. Brenda Sullivan asked, you showed off a pair of Doc Martens and commented that they needed to be cleaned up. Do you do that or sell as is on something like leather boots? So I do that myself. I don't do extensive cleaning, kind of back to the hat scenario. If I get a really dirty pair of boots, I won't buy them unless they're worth a lot of money because I don't want to spend a bunch of time cleaning them. But typically with leather boots like that, I use something, I can't remember what it's called. I'll flash it up on the screen here, but it's a pretty good product that does a good job of sort of freshening up the leather, cleaning a bunch of the dirt off and making the leather look relatively new. And so I recommend a product like that. It works pretty well. I just do it myself. Anything that requires more work, I typically just don't buy in the first place. All right, Jetta has asked, my biggest struggle is dealing with returns. As a full-time student, it's hard to deal with some customers dying to need to get their money back instantly. One time I got the package back and they said if they don't get the money back by 6 o'clock, they would contact eBay. I was out with my friends and didn't have my credit card, so I had to use one of their and pay it back. It's so annoying and frustrating. So what do you think I should do in the future if this happens again? I would say ignore the buyer. That buyer is overly demanding and sort of crazy if you ask me. And so that's another thing with new eBay sellers is they're very scared of getting negative feedback and they let buyers walk all over them. Don't do that. You're totally fine. You have rights as a seller as well. There's no scenario where a buyer on any platform is going to get their money back immediately on anything. And so it's nice that you did that, but I don't think it's necessary at all. So returns happen. I get it. It sucks. Nobody likes getting returns, but it's a part of doing business. If you don't like dealing with returns, you're probably not going to be very successful on eBay or other e-commerce ventures like that. It's okay to let a buyer wait 24 hours, even 48 hours to process a return. Just stand up for yourself. Don't let buyers walk all over you. Don't let the threat of negative feedback scare you. It's just not a big deal. Dunkfan asks, I resell a lot of clothing and wanted to have your opinion on washing before selling. Some people think it's gross to sell dirty clothes, but I figured the buyer will wash them before wearing anyway. Am I wrong? I don't think so. I think it's totally fine to sell things without first washing them. Now, if I buy something that is gross enough to need washing before selling it because I don't want to take photos of it in its current condition, then yeah, I will wash it first. But assuming you're just buying something at a thrift store that is visually looks good, and doesn't smell bad, then I don't bother washing it. And the expectation is the buyer's not going to just take it out of the package and immediately put it on. If they want to, they can, but they don't know where that came from. I know when I buy used clothes, first thing I do is put it in the wash. And so kind of the burden's on the buyer there. All right, G.I. Jason asks, I resell vintage toys and have primarily done Whatnot the last 2 years, but have also sold on eBay and I'm considering shifting more of my business to eBay. My questions are, have you sold on Whatnot? Thoughts? Any suggestions for someone with a more niche reselling business setting up on eBay? I've never sold on Whatnot. People have asked me that every once in a while, but I don't know. I just don't really care, I guess. I have enough things going on that adding another marketplace into my life right now is not a good idea. I don't have a whole lot of time to go around. Plus, like, the reason I like doing this YouTube channel, I like selling on eBay, is it feels accessible to everyone. You know, I can teach you how to sell on eBay, and you can go right now and start making money on eBay. And Whatnot just feels different, right? Like, I have no doubt that I could go over to Whatnot and probably sell a lot and make a lot of money because I have a following from YouTube, but not everyone has that. And my impression of Whatnot, and again, I don't know a whole lot about it, but my impression of Whatnot is that you're not going to have a whole lot of success unless you already have a following or you're selling something that is extremely interesting and is going to get a lot of attention and demand. And so the idea that I could teach you to go sell something on Whatnot, it just doesn't seem very feasible. It kind of goes against the ethos of what I like to teach on this channel. And so I just don't do it. No offense to those that do. It seems like a pretty cool platform, but just not my style. You also asked any suggestions for someone with a more niche reselling business setting up on eBay. So yeah, that's a good question. I think I'm an everything seller, and so I have very few return customers. I don't sell just in one particular category. My items are not that unique or interesting, but I think if I did sell in one particular niche, and I think I would take a different approach to how I sell on eBay, and I would focus more on branding and marketing. And so I would be very careful with the name that I pick, the eBay username. I would probably spend more time setting up my eBay store and branding it with a logo and all sorts of things, and including notes and other things when I sell stuff. Things that are going to help me get repeat customers and help me stand out in the niche that I'm in. But since I sell across all categories, I just don't really worry about that. And if you sell across categories, I would encourage you not to worry about it either. But if you are selling in a particular niche and you are trying to gain a big following, focus more on marketing, focus more on trying to build a repeat audience, because that becomes more important when you're selling in a single niche. What is the minimum margin you'll take on an item to determine whether it's worth picking up or not? So I don't really think of it that way, to be honest. I don't really think of it in terms of margin. It's more of an art than a science, honestly. I tend to look at the active listing price. I tend to look at the total number of active listings. I look at the sold listing price. I look at the total number of sold listings. I don't do like hard math in my head. I just sort of like get a feel for it. If there's 800 active listings and only 20 of them sold, I'm probably not going to buy something like that unless the return on it is going to be really significant, unless the margin is going to be really, really great. But if the sell-through rate is very good and I'm only going to make $10 or $15, like I might actually pick that up if it's easy to ship. And so there's all these different factors that come into play when I'm trying to decide whether to buy something or not. It's not strictly just margin, it's sell-through rate, it's ease of storage, it's ease of shipment, it's how fast it's going to sell, how much money it's going to bring. All those things kind of come together to give me an idea of whether I should buy it or not. All right, I have 20 items listed and I have posted at least one per day for almost 3 weeks. Nothing is sold yet. I'm trusting the process and being patient. At what point do I decide if my items are the issue or due to not having a selling history or both? What amount of time, days, weeks, months, do you suggest is normal to wait for a first sale? I'm also using Flipwise and has been very useful so far. Thank you. Great. Thanks for using Flipwise. That's awesome. It totally depends on what you're selling. So everything that you sell has a sell-through rate. It has and this doesn't need to be a mystery. You can check this. You can look it up. Or you take an item and you check the number of active listings that it has. You take that same item and check the number of sold listings that it has and compare those two. That's going to be your sell-through rate. eBay history, search history goes back 90 days. If there are 90 of those items that were sold, that means that one sells basically once every day. If there's 9,000 listed, then that means there's 9,000 competitors out there and only one of them sells per day. So yours is going to take a long time to sell. And so your question is like, at what point do I decide if my items are the issue? Like right now, you can look and see, are my items the issue? You check your sell-through rate and you look and see how many sell per day. And so take any one of those items, check the sales history for it and see how many have sold. If there's like 600 that have sold, and there's 100 listed, then something's going on. Like something's wrong with your listing in particular. Maybe it's priced wrong. Maybe there's condition issues. Maybe their pictures are wrong or bad. But you don't have to guess at all. So go through your inventory, check the sell-through rate, see how many are selling, and that'll give you an idea and help you set your expectations on how long it will take an item to sell. What amount of time do you suggest is normal to wait for a first sale? So there's really no normal there. It totally depends on what you're selling. You could, as a brand new seller, have an item that has an incredible sell-through rate, list it and have it sell in an hour. But you could also be a brand new seller and have an item that has a really poor sales history and you could wait 6 months for it to sell. So it just totally depends on what you're selling. Now that you're reselling full-time, are you spending more time sourcing? If so, are you going to thrift stores more on particular days that might be more stocked? So I'm actually not reselling full-time. I did quit my full-time job back in December, but reselling still is a part-time thing for me. I also spend my time on YouTube. I spend less time on YouTube than I do on actual reselling. And then most of my time is taken up by a separate venture that I'm running, which is Flipwise, which is the software product that I co-founded with a friend of mine to help manage your eBay inventory and sales data and automate your reselling business. And so that's the bulk of my time. I consider that my full-time job. And then, reselling and YouTube are kind of secondary jobs on the side. You asked if so, are you going to thrift stores more? I am going to thrift stores more. I'm spending more time on reselling than I did when I had a traditional full-time job where I wasn't self-employed. But so I'm going to thrift stores more for sure. I have a separate video on thrift stores in particular. I'll link that up top and down below. I don't really go on particular days. I don't have a set schedule. I just kind of go where my gut tells me to go. And thrift stores are all just different with how they handle their inventory when they put things out. Some thrift stores are going to be more stocked on certain days and others. It's really very dependent on the individual thrift store, but I talk about that in that other video, so you should check that out. All right, I would like to know where you source your massive buys with multiples of the same item, specifically the Kohler return pallet and the Nike clothing. I enjoy sourcing a mountain of one thing and then focusing on listing that. Me too. If I could get more of that type of high quality inventory at scale, I definitely would. The way that I get that sort of inventory is through personal connections that I've found in my reselling ventures. I'm out there reselling. I talk to people. I tell them what I'm doing. And I've made connections that have given me the opportunity to buy large amounts of inventory in that way. And so I'm not buying off like liquidations.com or HighBid or anything like that. Maybe you can. Maybe those are good places to buy that type of inventory, but I'm getting it through a personal connection. It was just somebody that I met on Facebook. I bought something from this woman on Facebook. It turns out she also is a reseller dealing with liquidation and things like that and has access to that sort of inventory. And so I go through her to get that whenever she has that type of thing available, which is not often, but sometimes. All right, what category or specific item seems the most tempting to you on the shelf at the thrift store, but isn't quite worth the squeeze, and why? That's a really good question. So I think one thing that comes to mind is coffee mugs. Like I just personally like collecting coffee mugs. In fact, I don't know if you can see that behind me. That shelf right there has a bunch of coffee mugs on it. I have coffee mugs all over the house. I just like buying them. I like collecting them. And so I have a soft spot for them. They usually do not sell for much money. They're usually not worth picking up, but I really have a hard time passing on a really cool coffee mug because I list it and I put it on my shelf. But some coffee mugs do really well. I've sold coffee mugs, in the hundreds, many hundreds of dollars for a single coffee mug. So there are some really valuable ones out there, but to use your words, they're usually not worth the squeeze. Another one that comes to mind are like keyboards, like computer keyboards. Sometimes they have a decent amount of value, like $15, $20, $25, but they always end up being more expensive to ship than you want. Or they're a Logitech and they don't come with a dongle and you don't realize that until you get home. Things like that. It's just not really worth the squeeze, but some computer keyboards do really well. And so it's a category I look out for, but typically just are not worth the squeeze. All right, where are your best places to source in St. Louis? In St. Louis and county, there's a lot of upper class, middle class, and lower class areas. Which areas do you target when sourcing at garage sales, or you just see what areas have them and go from there? So I source in a lot. I am from St. Louis. I source from a lot of thrift stores around the area. I go kind of all over, depending on the day or my mood or what I'm looking to buy. And so I do end up in West County quite a bit. I end up in South County a lot. I end up a little bit up north sometimes, depending on where I want to go. For garage sales, I usually stick around where I live. There's just some well-worn garage sale paths that I have that I can just drive down a few main streets, and there's always going to be garage sales kind of splintered off of those streets. Very rarely do I venture out to other parts of the city or county where I don't live for garage sales. I just know those areas less, and I spend more time driving than I want to, and so I usually just stick around the areas where I know the most. Okay, I could really use a video on handling returns. Most of what I have found are videos charged with emotion, assuming the return to be a scam. A clean, even-keeled video on the subject would be great. Different scenarios from buyer's remorse, honest mistakes in my listing, and actual scams. Tips for keeping the sold item sold as well would be great. So yeah, that might be a good topic for a video. I'll just say, like, on returns, I have I offer free returns, and I offer like no questions asked returns. So I always put that in my listing. This is really just to alleviate any sort of pressure and anxiety from myself about returns. Returns are going to happen. If you're selling online, they're going to happen. If you're constantly getting anxious or upset when you get a return, like this is not going to be fun at all for you. And so I offer free returns. Or somebody's like, I want to return something. I'm like, cool, do it, send it back, whatever, I don't care. That's the way I would recommend you do it. Don't give too much thought into whether somebody's trying to scam you or not. Scams, of course, do happen. Return scams do happen, but they are very, very, very infrequent. I can count on like one hand how many times I've actually had a return scam where somebody returned something entirely different than what I had. Every single time eBay's backed me and covered the cost, and I've never lost money on it. And so it's just really a non-issue. So I just like assume that I'm going to get between 1% and 3% of the inventory that I sell is going to be returned. So yeah, maybe I'll do a video on the entire subject of returns. That might be a good idea. I'll think about that. All right. Do you think buying a store subscription would pay for itself, if not more? Like, will it get me at least an extra $21 in profit each month? To be honest, I don't know all of the benefits of a store subscription. I know that it gives you a larger allotment of listings. And so if you run out of your allotment of listings, eBay is going to charge you an insertion fee. I think it's like 30 or 35 cents per listing. If you have a store subscription, you don't get charged that. And so if you're listing a lot of inventory, so much so that you're constantly getting charged those insertion fees, it's probably the number one reason why you'd want to get a store. That also goes for like ending and relisting. I think there's another question on here about ending and relisting, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I do a lot of ending and relisting, so I'll just mass end like 500 listings and then relist them to refreshen their presence in the eBay algorithm. I find a lot of success with that, and so I want to have a buffer, enough free listings from eBay through the store so that I don't have to worry about being charged 35 cents for that. Because if you were doing a mass end and relist and you were charged 35 cents per end and relist, that would be a huge amount of money. And so for me, the store pays itself in that regard, as I can just list as many as I want. Okay, a few questions. Where do you get packing materials and boxes in St. Louis? What are your most used box sizes and mailer sizes? Any updates on Flipwise being available if we signed up for it? So I'll start with the boxes in St. Louis. So I use a box supplier. Sometimes I buy boxes online just through eBay, like through the Boxery or one of those places on eBay. Other times I will go local. If I'm buying a ton of boxes, there's a place, I can't remember, I'll link it in the description below. It's something generic like St. Louis Paper and Box Supply or something. It's up north, but it's nice. You can just go pick it up. You don't get charged any shipping fees on it, but you do have to buy quite a bit to make that make sense. The prices are pretty good though, and they're comparable to Uline and places like that, but you don't have to pay for shipping, so it ends up being a lot cheaper. As far as poly mailers and sizes of boxes, just off the top of my head, like 8x6x4, 10x6x8, 12x12x9, 12x12x4, 18x16x6. Those are all common box sizes that we use, pretty regularly. In terms of poly bags, I usually only keep one or two sizes of poly bags on hand. That's like a 9x12 and then like a 16x9, a slightly wider one or slightly longer one. And I'll occasionally buy some padded poly mailers using like the store credit that I get from eBay. Usually those are like 9x6 or 9x12. Any updates on Flipwise being available if we signed up for it? So if you signed up to be a beta tester, chances are you probably have already gotten an invite. If you haven't gotten an invite, check your spam folder. I've noticed some people think that they haven't gotten an invite, but they check their spam folder and there it is. So check your spam folder if you've signed up to be a beta tester but have not gotten an invite. Otherwise, we'll be open to the public relatively soon. We're still in the beta phase. We're still fixing a lot of bugs and bringing out new features, but we expect to be out of beta in late March is our goal. So we keep moving it back a little bit. We just want it to be good by the time we get it out there for mass public consumption. So coming soon for sure. All right, when you list and sell something personal and you have no idea how much it costs, should your cost of goods be zero? This is a great question. This comes up all the time. It's more of a tax question. And so this is not tax advice. I am not a tax expert. You should definitely consult with a tax expert, but it really depends on a lot of factors. I think some people just put zero for the cost of goods, but a lot of folks will get like the fair market value of what the cost is based on, I don't know, a number of factors. So if you bought something in 1986 for $200, there's some way to calculate a fair market value of that item today, and you would put that in instead. The reason you might do that is you can lower your taxable income by giving it an appropriate cost. And so your net return will be lower, your income will be lower, and thus your tax will be lower. So it really is up to you. You could also just put zero and consider it all profit, but then you're probably paying more taxes on it than you should. But again, I'm not a tax expert. You should definitely ask a tax expert because they're going to give you a way more accurate answer than I can. All right, what are your top 3 sandwiches of all time? That's a great question. I don't know if I can name 3. I'll name one though. My favorite sandwich of all time is from Joya's Deli here in St. Louis, the hot salami. So that is by far the best sandwich on planet Earth. I will say a close second would be a muffaletta from Central Grocery in New Orleans. So those are the 2. Maybe I could think of a third. I don't know. Well, anyway, we'll leave it at 2. Those are the 2 best ones. How about a video discussing how you determine pricing for your finds? I found it frustrating to list an item like TI-84, for example. My pricing is close to the average, including shipping, and a top-rated sell with 100% feedback. Why did my items sell before the other, which were listed at a higher price? So this is a great topic. I actually have one video where I discuss some of this stuff and some of my thoughts on this. It's called the eBay pricing problem. So I'll link it up here and down below. That talks a lot about the challenges of finding the right prices and how to price your item on eBay. It's just not simple at all. It's more of an art than a science. There's another video that I really want to make, but I have not made yet. And that is to your second point on it, which is like, why did my item not sell if it was priced lower? And the reality is eBay has a lot more control over when you get sales than you might think. And so this is all nested in the eBay algorithm. Nobody knows how it works except for eBay themselves. I don't know how it works, but I have my theories on it. And so, for example, even if you have your TI-84 competitively priced and it doesn't sell, it's probably because the eBay algorithm is not giving preference to your listing at the time when that person is buying. And so they have a lot of control over where in search results your listing is going to show up when somebody searches TI-84. And whether someone buys or not has a lot to do with where it shows up in search results. And so eBay has a lot of ability to control who gets sales and when, and there's a lot of factors that determine when that happens. And again, I don't know it for sure. I don't work for eBay, but I have a lot of theories on that. I'll probably do a separate video on that because it's really interesting, and I think there's a lot to be said there. All right, how do you figure out shipping costs when listing without prepackaging your inventory? So another good question. So some people prepackage their inventory, so they buy something and they list it and they put it in the box right away so they know how much to charge for shipping. And you can certainly do that, but it does add a lot of extra time to the listing process. And the more time it takes to list something, the less you're going to be able to list. And eBay is all about listing. And so I personally do not prepackage anything before I list it or when I list it. I just package it when it sells. But it does mean you have to have a good idea of what the weight and size of that box will eventually be when you ship it. And really, this is just something that you learn over time with experience. And so when I first started, I was much more rigorous with weighing and measuring and making sure that I knew how much it was going to cost to ship. Now I just know. I just know roughly what size box something's going to go in, roughly how much it's going to weigh, and I know the max amount that I'm going to pay to ship that to the furthest place that my shipping business policies allow. For example, the most expensive shipping from where I'm at here in St. Louis is always going to be to Oregon or Washington State. Somewhere on the upper or Pacific Northwest is always going to be the most expensive. And so I sort of use that as a frame of reference for what the maximum cost to ship will be. And I price things accordingly. I don't use calculated shipping, so that changes things. And so I think if you use calculated shipping, you do have to be a little bit more specific, or else your buyer is going to get charged a lot more or less to ship something than it actually is going to cost, which can be problematic. The reason I don't use calculated shipping is because I like my my listings to be competitive on price. And so if I use calculated shipping, it may quote for the buyer a much higher shipping cost than it'll actually be. And a buyer really cares about their all-in price, how much the item costs plus how much the shipping is going to cost. And so if they're being quoted $100 on something that's going to cost $20 to ship, they're likely not going to buy from me. And so I either do free shipping and I build the cost to ship into the total purchase price, or I do flat shipping and I just have some tiers of flat shipping prices that I select based on the individual item. And so I have like a $6.99 flat shipping, I have a $9.99 flat shipping, I have a $14.99 flat shipping, I have a $19.99 flat shipping, I have a $24.99 flat shipping. And so depending on where in the range that's going to land, I will pick that flat shipping option, or like I said, just do free shipping and build it into the cost. But at the end of the day, like I think shipping just trips a lot of new sellers up. And the way I think about it is that as a buyer, you're paying one amount. It doesn't matter like whether you're paying $1 for the item and $99 to ship, or $99 for the item or $1 to ship, or $100 for the item with free shipping. Like the buyer is going to pay a specific amount no matter what. An item has a specific value regardless of how much it costs to get it from A to B. And so when I think of the value of something, like if I'm going to sell this mouse right here, like this mouse has a value. It is not going to be worth more than like $16. And so I know that this thing is going to be light, and I know it's not going to cost a whole lot to ship. And the market value for it is $15. So if I want to sell it to somebody, I'm going to price it at $15, whether that's $15 in free shipping or $10 and $5 in shipping or $7.50 and $7.50 in shipping. Just really doesn't matter. It's going to have a market value regardless. Sometimes you're going to get burned on shipping if somebody far away picks your item. Sometimes you're going to make more money if someone close to you buys the item. And so that's just the way I do it. It's not for everyone. I end up leaving money on the table for sure. I end up getting more money sometimes for sure. I think it evens out roughly. But the one thing that's really important is it allows me to list super fast. And that's my number one thing. I just want to be listing as fast as I possibly can, as much as I possibly can. So I try to remove as many barriers as I can from that listing process. And so that's why I don't prepackage any of my stuff. All right, how do you track your inventory after listing an item to know where it is once it sells? So this is part of what my product Flipwise does, is it allows you to input your storage location. So you say, oh yeah, I'm listing this mouse, I'm putting it in the bin A1A, and so I go back into Flipwise after it's listed and I give the storage location A1A. Once it sells, then Flipwise tells me like, hey, this mouse just sold, it's located at A1A, go get it, and then you ship it. So that's how I do it. You could also use a spreadsheet or really anything. You write on a piece of paper if you want. Okay, next one. Would you list $10 with low sell-through or less items you have, or source better stuff? You know, if I already had an item that was worth $10 and it has a low sell-through rate, I might list it if I have no other inventory. I'm definitely not going to buy something that's only going to net me $10 and it has a low sell-through rate and going to take forever to sell. I'm just going to go find different and better inventory. But if I had it laying around, I might list it. All right, next, if you've been a buyer on eBay for a while and have tons of positive feedback on that side, does that translate in any way to help the algorithm when you begin listing as a seller? Maybe, I don't know. Nobody knows how the algorithm works. I would assume that it does play some role in the placement of your listings in search, which is generally what defines your ability to sell something, is where your item is going to show up in search. eBay is probably more likely to promote listings from sellers that are trusted than they would if they were untrusted. Again, I'm speculating. I have no idea. But I don't think feedback plays as big of a role as most sellers think. I think it is secondary to a lot of other things. Also, I seem to be stuck right now. I feel like I need to be organized enough to hit the ground running so that I list 5 to 7 items per day right away just to kickstart the algorithm for me so my listings show closer to the top. Sure. Am I even correct in thinking this will help? Yeah, I think you're definitely correct in thinking this will help. And I do need to do a separate video on this. Consistency is key. Really, eBay, if you're inconsistent, it is not going to consistently give you sales. Like if you're consistent, it's going to consistently give you sales. And so if you're just like listing one thing on one day and then waiting 3 weeks and listing 3 things and then waiting 4 weeks and listing one thing, like it's just, eBay is going to respond accordingly by not giving you many sales. Instead, if you're listing 5 things every day, like you're going to establish a baseline for expectations from the eBay algorithm. To expect this many listings out, eBay eventually is going to start giving you that many sales, assuming you're listing things that actually have a decent sell-through rate. But yeah, being consistent it's all about being consistent. That's the number one thing you need to do. All right. I would like to ask the differences between eBay, Poshmark, and Mercari. I've only started on eBay. Not sure if it's worth doing the others as well. Would you cross-post on them? So I don't do any cross-listing right now. I know there's software that does cross-listing. We're going to build cross-listing into Flipwise eventually. I don't focus on it right now because I was not really happy with any of the tools out there, and it's way too hard to cross-list everything manually, especially if you have a decent sized store like I do. And so I don't do any cross-listing. Mercari is kind of like a smaller eBay. Some people have a lot of success there. Like I've sold things here and there, but I don't do it with any sort of regularity. Poshmark is way more focused on clothing. And so if that's the category you sell in, it was probably a good idea that you consider selling on Poshmark as well. I really only sell on eBay. That's my main focus. And I don't know a whole lot about the other platforms. What's the best sale you've ever had? And what's the worst and most costly mistake as a reseller? So I don't know. I can just look this up here. So the best sell I've ever had, I'm just going to go into Flipwise here and sort by net return the opposite way. So yeah, the best one I've ever had is this Swiss made clock that I paid $130 for, and it sold for $1,224, and my net return was $866. Looks like I had a Department 56 Dr. Seuss Grinch Village that sold for $576 net return, another Department 56 Dr. Seuss for $504. By the way, I got those at the same garage sale. I have 3 of them, and I made about $1,500 net on one garage sale. It was pretty amazing. So yeah, that's the best sell I've had. What was the other question here? What's your worst and most costly mistake as a reseller? I don't know. Let's just look at net return of the opposite. Yeah, so I'm just looking at the stuff here. Like this was off a Amazon return pallet. I don't like doing Amazon return pallets. Like sometimes I guess they're good, but the ones that I have bought end up having a lot of broken stuff on it. Here's another question on returns. I hear you talk all the time about offering hassle-free returns. Do you mean that you're checking the box that says the seller, you pay for shipping on all returns? Doesn't that mean that if an item ever gets returned that I'm eating the return cost, or is that not a big deal to have the buyer pay return shipping? Yeah, so I do hassle-free returns. That does mean free returns. That means if anyone wants to return something for any reason, I pay as the seller the return costs on that. And I do that because I think that's what buyers expect these days. I think Amazon has set the bar for that, like it or not. So I do it. I think it's a good customer service thing. The fact is, even if you don't accept returns on eBay, or even if you require that the buyer pays for the returns on eBay, they can still return something, and they can still return it in a way that requires you to pay for it. And so I just say, hey, I'm going to go ahead and offer free returns, and that way I get the benefits of offering it as well. And it really doesn't impact my return rate at all. I usually hover between 1% and 3% on returns. I believe you talked about this before, but I don't remember correctly. I woke up to an item hasn't arrived case on eBay when it shows it was delivered. I messaged the buyer saying the tracking number and shows it was delivered. What do I do from here? So you're good. As long as the tracking shows delivered, your job as a seller on eBay is done. Doesn't matter what the buyer says. If somebody stole it off their porch, that sucks, but it's not your fault. There's nothing you can do about it. You're probably halfway across the country. You have no jurisdiction in where they live. You can't do anything. So you're good. As long as it shows delivered on the tracking, that's why it's so important to have tracking on everything you sell on eBay. As long as that shows delivered, there's nothing you need to do. And they could open up a case and do all sorts of things, but eBay will side with you. So, okay, last one here. Would love to know more about how you go about deleting and reposting items, if there's any benefit to it. I've also heard this can negatively impact your seller rating. Is this true, and does it matter? So yeah, I do a lot of ending and relisting. It's a very important thing, I think. And it depends on who you ask. Some people will say that it doesn't impact anything, but my personal opinion and my own anecdotal evidence shows that ending and relisting is a very helpful thing to do to get sales and to keep the items in your inventory sort of freshened in the eyes of eBay. And I just have countless examples of items that have been sitting for 6 months without anything and no sales and nothing, and then I end it and relist it, and then it sells 2 or 3 days later. And so I think it's a very positive thing to do. There's certainly nothing that's going to negatively impact you as a seller if you do this, your seller rating. And it doesn't matter. I mean, at the end of the day, eBay wants you to list as many things as possible, even if that means ending and relisting. So there's definitely no negative impact to it. And I think there's only positive that comes from it. So you can do it in bulk. You can use the bulk editing tool. You can mass end all your listings or a chunk of your listings and then in bulk relist it. And I can do my store sits at about 1,000 listings, and I could end and relist the entire thing in about 2 minutes. So it's really a quick and easy thing to do, and I think it's definitely worthwhile, so you should do it. Jerry Lives asks, wondering how you often pay up for something and what criteria would qualify you doing so. Thanks, and looking forward to more content. So generally I buy low and sell high, but sometimes I do buy high and sell higher. And when I do that depends on a couple of factors. I don't mind paying up for something if it's going to bring a larger net return and or if it's going to sell fast. That's where sell-through rate comes in to be pretty important, is how long is something going to take to sell. I'm okay with spending more money if it's going to sell a lot faster, and you can tell that by checking the sell-through rate, or if it's going to return a lot of money. For example, I may not pay $100 to buy something that's going to sell for $200 in 6 months, but I might pay $100 for something that'll sell for $200 in 2 days. I'm simplifying it here, but you get the idea. You definitely want to be checking the sell-through rate. It also depends on the category too. And so, for example, there is just certain categories that I avoid because they tend to bring problematic buyers or scammers. I avoid buying Apple products, for example. I just don't like the hassle that comes with trying to sell an iPad or a MacBook Pro or things like that. Even though they're profitable, I just don't like doing that type of thing. But I might spend more money on a lot of like crocheting gear because the types of buyers that that category brings is not going to be as difficult to deal with. So category plays a role in it as well. Uncle Ronnie asks, I've been reselling for 30 years, mostly used collectible items with a small sprinkling of new. In that time frame, new items more and more come hermetically sealed with holograms and all this anti-theft all over them. Part of me says I must open the box to take my own photos and ensure the items is still good, but the term open box has such a negative connotation that I would be reluctant to. I've been burned too many times by assuming that sealed items are good both as a buyer and a seller. Do you video opening boxes and insert it in the pics? Thanks for all you do. Thanks for the question. It's a good question. First, I would advise not opening sealed items. That's just going to drastically reduce the value right away. You're going to make a lot less money. I'm not saying that scams don't happen, but the amount of times that I've been scammed on eBay after literally thousands and thousands of sales, I think I've had close to 10,000 sales. I can count on one hand how many times I've actually been scammed. And every single time that that's happened, I've reached out to eBay and they have covered it for me. It's never come out of my pocket. And so the fear of scams is way overblown. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. It definitely happens, but the fear of it is way overblown. And so I just wouldn't worry about if you're trying to sell an item that is sealed. I definitely would not open it. I would sell it sealed and new. In terms of taking photo evidence and video evidence, none of that matters. I would not waste your time doing any of it. eBay's not going to accept it as evidence, and it's very easy to fake. If I wanted to fake me putting a sealed item into a box and taping it up and then sending it off, like I could just very easily fake that. eBay's not going to accept any evidence like that, and so I would not advise you to spend time filming yourself opening or sealing items or anything like that. So again, don't open the sealed items. I would not recommend opening them. Sell them sealed, sell them new. Don't worry about filming anything. eBay's not going to take that as evidence anyway, because it's way too easy to fake, and just trust that everything will go fine. And 99.9% of the time, everything will go fine. Wilby asks, regarding metrics, can you share more of what your typical targets or thresholds are for ongoing metrics like ROI, margin, and dollar amount? Sure, happy to share that. I don't really think of it in that way. I don't have a target ROI, for example. ROI is not a great metric to use in that regard because it doesn't consider your margins. It doesn't consider how much money you can make. And so you can have a ROI that's extremely high, but only make a little bit amount of money. And in the reverse, you can have an ROI that's extremely low and make a ton of money. And so ROI is not a good thing to target and make sure you're always getting. Otherwise, you'll turn down deals that you otherwise probably should have bought. The way I use ROI in my own business is I know what my average return on investment is. And if you look at my lifetime data, it's usually right around 6. Let's look at my lifetime data before I say that. If you look at my ROI over the last year or so, it's right around 700%. And so that just means if I go out sourcing and I stick to what I know and I just buy the things that I know are going to be resellable and I don't lower my standards for the quality of items that I buy, I'm basically going to get 700% return on whatever I buy. If I spend $100 on stuff at garage sales on a Saturday, in my head, I can just sort of know, okay, that's going to be roughly $700 coming back to me. And again, it's averages. So sometimes it's going to be higher, sometimes it's going to be lower. But for me, it's just a good mindset thing. It's like, okay, I know that my average ROI is roughly 700%. And so how much money did I just spend? How much money am I probably going to make? That's how I use ROI. The sort of targets that I do set though are on listing, for example. And so I have listing targets. That's the most important thing for me, is that I just trust that I'm going to continue to buy decent inventory based on what I know. I just need to get that stuff listed. It's so easy to let it sit there and not list it. And so for me, the most important targets that I set are listing targets. I set 5 per day. I need to be listing 5 different listings every single day. That's my target. Reed's Home Garage asks, please let us know how you avoid the verified rights owner VeRO. So what Reed's asking here is the verified rights ownership program, which is a program that eBay does with a variety of brands out there to make sure that people aren't selling brands that they shouldn't be on eBay. And so if you sell a brand that you should not be selling on eBay, eBay might notice and they might take that down, and that's called a VeRO request. And eBay manages a list of all of the brands that you're not really supposed to sell on eBay. I'll link it down below. This is what it looks like right here, but it's really difficult as a seller, because if you look at this list, like almost every single brand is on there, and you can go down the list and do searches for brands on this list and you'll see just tons of items listed. So in my experience, there's really no good way to avoid getting a VeRO request or a takedown request on the items that you sell, unless you get one. That once you've gotten it, then you know, okay, I probably shouldn't be selling that again. Usually the ones that I don't get anymore because I don't repeat the same mistakes. But for example, if you list a bunt cake, bunt, B-U-N-D-T, is actually like a term that is owned by the company Nordic Ware. And so if you sell a bunt cake that is not Nordic Ware and you call it a bunt cake, they get mad and they take it down. So that's an example of a VeRO that I've run into, for example. But they don't tell you that in the documentation on eBay. You just sort of have to discover it yourself. Flip It Mama asks, I'll try to schedule listings at 8 per day, and I have a week's worth of listings ready to go live. If I find really valuable items with great sell-through rates, should I wait until my next week's listings to post them, or should I post them right away? It's a good question. So it's good to have kind of a bank of scheduled listings so that if you don't get around to listing one day, you're automatically going to have your goal listings go live for that day. But you're asking if you happen to source things in between, should you schedule them out into the future or should you just list them right away? And it's really up to you. Personally, I just list them right away, especially if they're high value, high sell-through rate. Like, they're not going to sell if they're not listed, and so you might as well get them up. But it's really a personal choice for you. If you want to keep that draft bank going or that scheduled listing bank going, then you can certainly do that. But I personally go in and just list stuff right away. The Love Story Project asks, hello, Justin. I just sold a mug. Hey, great job. I love selling mugs. Thanks for all the information you share in your videos. Really useful. I had a question. Does size of store matter beyond more products, more opportunity to find a buyer? Is there any evidence that eBay likes bigger stores and sellers? Is it worth getting from 250 to 500 products? So that's a good question. I would say the answer to that is yes. You are going to sell more the more that you list, but I wouldn't think of it as like, I would just want to indiscriminately get my store up to 500 listings. You want to do it in the right way. You want to get it up there with good inventory. eBay doesn't care if you have 500 items listed that nobody will buy. They're not going to see that as a signal and suddenly find buyers to buy stuff that has no demand. But if you are able to get inventory that is in high demand, that buyers want, get as much of it up as possible and you will make as much money as you can. So that's it. It's a per item basis. eBay doesn't care whether you have one item listed or 1,000 items listed. It's about the individual demand of those items that you have listed. Jeff asks, have you thought about using calculated shipping to make more profit? I noticed that you charged $14.99 shipping on the Little Playmates Disney set, but actual shipping was $30. Using calculated shipping has been a game changer for me. The profit on the item was good, but could it have been better? So this is a great question. I'm glad you brought this up. Jeff's referring to a sale that I had from my last video that was like a Disney castle, and I had put $14.99 shipping on that, and the shipping was actually $30. As you're asking, well, maybe you should have done calculated shipping on that. You would have made more money. And this is, I'm probably going to get a lot of people that disagree with this because there's a lot of nuance to this strategy. I don't recommend the strategy to everyone necessarily. It depends on what you sell and it depends on a lot of different things. But this is exactly why I don't do calculated shipping, is because the way I look at it is an item has a total value for a buyer to buy that item and get it delivered to their house. And so if I would have put calculated shipping on that castle, it would have sold for $80 and the actual shipping cost would have been $30. That would have priced that castle out of market for that buyer. That would have made it way too expensive. They would have been able to find that castle cheaper than what I would have had it listed at if I was using calculated shipping. And so a big reason I don't use calculated shipping is because it does not allow me to control the market value of what I'm selling. The market value with calculated shipping ends up being a variable dependent on the location of a potential buyer. And that ends up, in my opinion, excluding a lot of potential buyers from ever buying it because it prices the item up to be out of the market value for that item. And so by using free shipping or by building in a flat shipping cost like I did with that one in particular. It allows me to set the market value that I want to get. And you do run the risk in that scenario of selling it to someone where the shipping cost is higher than what you put for the shipping cost. But again, I don't look at it that way. I look at it as a single value. This is what this item is worth. The amount that I charge my buyers for shipping is more of a psychological decision, not a value decision. And so that's why I don't use calculated shipping, is because I don't get to control the market value of the items I list when I use calculated shipping. And it ends up making the price of my items much higher in certain scenarios for buyers. But it's risky. I know a lot of people may disagree with that. A lot of people will see that as like a way to lose money. Personally, I think opening myself up to more buyers outweighs the value of excluding a bunch of buyers and only getting buyers that are going to pay my exact shipping costs. So it's a trade-off, but you make the decision for yourself. That's just how I do it in particular. Catherine asks, as a new reseller, I would like to know when is the right time to start selling internationally. It seems more technical, or am I being naive? So I think you should start selling internationally as soon as you possibly can. There might be some restrictions on the eBay side for new sellers not being able to sell internationally. I'm not exactly sure what those are. You should look them up. But if you are eligible to be a part of the international shipping program through eBay, you should do it 100%. I think it is an excellent program. Basically, what it means is when you sell through the international shipping program, you open up the audience of people who can buy your stuff to be across the globe. I can't remember how many countries it is, but it's a lot. And it's for you as the seller, it's the exact same thing as selling it domestically. And so if an international buyer buys your item through the international shipping program, you don't send it to the end buyer, you send it to eBay. And eBay takes it, they inspect it, and they repackage it, and they handle all of the fees and the taxes and the forms and all of that stuff. You don't have to handle any of it. And so it's super easy. You just send it to a local warehouse here in the United States, and eBay takes care of the rest. Also, there's no returns on the international shipping program. So if a buyer doesn't like it or it breaks or whatever, they may open up a return, but eBay doesn't charge you as the seller for that return. So I love it when I get a sale through the international shipping program, because I know it's a done deal. I know I'm not going to get a return on it. As long as you get the item to eBay's warehouse successfully, then you're off the hook for anything else that happens to that item after the fact. The only thing I don't like about the international shipping program is that eBay does repackage the stuff for you. And so if you are selling stuff internationally through that program that is very delicate, eBay does not do as good of a job as you will in packaging your items. And so they'll open it up, they'll inspect it, and they'll repackage it. They won't do as of a good job. And sometimes those things are going to arrive broken. And again, as a seller, you don't have to cover the cost of that if it does get broken. eBay covers the cost of it, but it still sucks to have your item broken in transit when you put all this effort into shipping it correctly and then they don't pack it well. That's the only downside that I have with the international shipping program. I think that program is also more expensive for the buyer on the other side of it. I think if I were selling directly to buyers internationally, it would be cheaper for them, but I don't want to deal with the hassle that comes with having to ship it internationally. So I'm happy to make that trade-off, probably get less international sales, but they are much more secure and easy to handle through the international shipping program. So do it right away if you can. All right, Steven asks, hi Justin, do you fill in item specifics that eBay nags us about in the tasks section? I've been filling them all out because I don't want to be nagged about them, but I'm not sure it helps with sales, and it sure takes a decent amount of time. Let me take a look. I'm going to look at my phone here. I'm going to open up the eBay app and see. I don't think I do this. I don't think I keep this up to date at all. So if I go into selling, I have 687 items that I need to add my recommended item specifics to. So I do not pay attention to that. Maybe if I did update those things would sell faster. I'm not really sure, but I've not made the effort to fill in that information. So maybe I should try that though. Karen asks, one question, if you source a VCR, DVD player, or any remote-controlled electronic device in working condition, do you pick it up whether it has a remote or not? So it depends on the device. The VCRs, VCR-DVD combos, I typically will still pick them up even if they don't have a remote, just because they're still worth a decent amount of money. But like anything else, I just check comps, and with something that requires a remote, you can very easily see what it goes for with the remote and without the remote, and I just do the math in my head at the time to determine whether it's still worth it to do it without the remote. I also sometimes just look up to see how much it costs to buy a remote, and so you may find that it sells for $45 more with the remote, but you can get the remote for $15. Might make sense to go ahead and do that just to get a little bit of extra profit out of it, but it just depends on the device. With VCRs, I typically do buy them without the remote though. S. Veen asks, I work in the grocery industry and net profit also needs to include the growing cost of labor. How much time do you spend each week packaging up the hundreds of items you sell? I really don't see many resellers talking about this at all. Good question. How much time do I spend on all of this? I do have a video. It's called How I Made $82,000 or How I Sold $82,000 on eBay part-time last year, where I do give a complete breakdown of all the time that we spend doing this. It's not super accurate anymore. Honestly, I spend less time on eBay now than I did then, but I'll just break it down really quick in my head. This is a side hustle for me. It's not my full-time job, so I don't track my hours super closely, but I have a good idea. I have the same processes that we repeat over and over again. Mondays, the shipping usually takes about an hour because of the weekend sales, and then Tuesday through Friday, it's much quicker. It's usually maybe a half hour, so what is that? That's 2 hours. That's 3 hours of shipping per week. Sourcing, we go out to thrift stores 2 or 3 times per week and spend at least an hour each time. So let's call that 3 or 4 hours per week. So that's 4. I'm losing the math in my head at this point. How do I not have any paper around here? All right, I found some paper. So let's see. I'm going to go ahead and do the math right here with you. Let's see. So we ship Monday through Friday. 1 hour on Monday and 3 hours the rest. So that's 4 hours total on shipping per week. And so on sourcing during the week, we usually go to a thrift store 2 or 3 times and spend an hour, including the time to get there. So let's call that, 3 hours per week. Sourcing on the weekends, we do garage sales typically from about 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. So that's another 3 hours. That's 6 hours on sourcing. That's 10 hours total so far. And then listing. And so I list 5 things per day. I typically can bang out about 5 items in a half hour. And so that's, 30 minutes times 7. That's 210 minutes. That's 3.5 hours listing per week. That's 13.5 hours. Let's round it up to 15 hours per week. So we spend about 15 hours per week doing this between shipping, listing, and sourcing. All right, Colette asks, I'm curious to know what percentage of the time are you first to show up at the yard sale you go to? And do you generally make it a practice to arrive earlier than the start times? If so, how much earlier? Thanks. So I very rarely am I the first to show up at a yard sale. Usually I go out right at 7 a.m. So the first one I go to, I might be the first one to show up at, but I don't make an effort to show up earlier than an advertised time. If I arrive at a garage sale and it turns out that it's earlier than they open, maybe I'm out going and it doesn't open till 8, I'll ask the person, hey, are you open? I don't want to just barge in. But I try to respect whatever the house owner, wants from their garage sale. If they're okay with letting people in early, great. If they're not, I'm happy to not go in early. I think there's certain regions around the country I found that, the garage sale rules are different, where going early is a big no-no. Around here, people don't seem to care if you show up early, but again, I just defer to the owner. All right, Dreams asks, I'm curious about your worst flips. If you list them at the price that earns you a low net return, don't you already have a good idea at the time of listing that it will bring a low return? So are these items you've lowered the price on over time? What gives? Thanks so much for the content. So yeah, that's a great question. Most of the time, yes, I already know at the time of listing that it's not going to bring a whole lot of money in. Usually in my videos, when I express surprise at the value that I had at something, it's not when it sold, it's like when I sourced it. That's kind of confusing, I know. When I say like, oh, I can't believe this thing sold for this amount, like I'm not talking about right in that moment I can't believe it, but once I get it home and I'm doing the research, that's usually when the surprise happens, is because I'm learning the actual value of it. By the time it's listed, by the time it's sold, I already know what it's going to sell for. And so if I have low value items sitting around, I will still list them usually. Sometimes I look them up and the sell-through rate is just so poor, I know it's going to be sitting for, a year plus. I just won't list those types of things. But if I have, things that'll sell for 10 or 15 bucks, I'll list them. I might as well make a few dollars from them. I don't typically go out and source those things on purpose to buy, but sometimes it's either maybe they came in a lot of different things and there was one valuable thing and a lot of cheaper things, or I thought it was going to be more valuable than it was, or yeah, I'll have lowered the price over time because it hadn't sold. That's another good example of that. Sean asks, you said you do some or a lot of garage sale buys. You put on garage sales yourself to sell things that are not selling on eBay or your other platforms just to measure room or recoup some money. So yeah, I do go to a lot of garage sales. I don't hold a lot of garage sales though. Personally, I would rather be out there at garage sales than running running my own garage sale. So don't do a whole lot of garage sales. Maybe once every 3 years I'll do a garage sale. Eddie asks, 2 quick questions. What do you use for void fill and where do you get it? So for void fill, I buy from a company called The Boxery, and I buy it usually through eBay. I think they have their own website, but it's no cheaper. And so it's just easier for me to go through eBay and I can use eBay funds to buy it. But The Boxery has large rolls of like brown craft paper, which is the cheapest I've found it is through The Boxery. I haven't done a ton of research, but I'll link it down below. You can decide whether that's, worth it for you for your void fill. I also just keep all void fill that I get from other packaging. Like if I order from Amazon, I take the void fill from there, set it aside, and use that. Your second question was, am I right in thinking you class an item as vintage if it is more than 20 years old? I seem to think I heard once that vintage is 40 years old, retro is 20, and antique is 100. That's a good question. Personally, I consider 20 years old to be vintage. I don't think there's like vintage police out there that if you use it incorrectly, they're going to get mad. There's certainly people on eBay who will send you passive aggressive messages if you put something as vintage that shouldn't be, but you're not going to break any laws doing it. But personally, I use 20 years for vintage. Retro, I've never used that term officially. Retro feels less specific than vintage. Retro could mean 50 years old or it could mean 10 years old. It could be just a style, retro style, not necessarily an indicator of age. An antique at 100 years, that sounds about right to me, but I don't sell a lot of antiques, so I'm not 100% sure about that. I know there's some of y'all who could tell me in the comments though, so let us know down there. Ezra asks, hey Justin, love your channel. Your advice is always clear and easy to understand. Wish you the best. Thanks, you too. Question, did you ever consider going full time? Do you think it is a good idea? I'd love to hear your thoughts. So for me personally, no, I've never really considered going full time on eBay for a couple of reasons. The first big reason, this is a personal reason, is I think I would get bored and burned out if that was my only venture. I'm someone who likes to have a lot of different things going on. And so at any given time, I've got probably a half dozen different ventures that I use, to make money and to take up my time, whether they're hobbies or they're businesses or things like that. And reselling is just one of those. And that's personally where I like reselling to be, is as a side hustle, as a venture. I love doing it, but I think I would love doing it less if it was the only thing that I did. I like making YouTube videos. I like reselling stuff. I like running my startup. But if you're someone who doesn't want that, who doesn't mind doing that full time, you definitely can. Lots of people out there are selling on eBay full time. And it really just depends on a couple of factors. First, you need to understand how much your household takes to run. How much money do you need to be bringing in order to survive? In order to do that, you just want to be tracking all of your expenses over some amount of time, 2 or 3 months. Track all money going in and out so you have a good idea of how much money you need to make in order to go full-time on something. Really should be doing that anyway. And then you want to be tracking your eBay sales data as well. Profit margin is a really important number when it comes to determining whether or not you can go full-time on eBay. And profit margin is basically the amount of money that you take home based on what you sell. And so if you sell something for $100 and you take home $50, that's a 50% net profit margin. If you're tracking your sales over time and have a good idea of what your average net profit margin is, then you can determine how much you need to sell on eBay in order to take enough money home to live off of. And so if it takes your household $5,000 to live per month, to pay rent or mortgage and food and all that stuff, and you know that you have an average net profit margin of say 50%, you need to be selling per month, $10,000 on eBay in order to make that amount of money, not including income tax. I'll let you figure that part out. I'm simplifying it here, but that's how you would go about figuring that out, is track your data in terms of your household income and expenses, track your data on the eBay side so that you have a good idea of your net profit margins, and then just figure out how much do I need to sell in order to make that possible and make the decision whether you can do it or not. But lots of people do it. It's just not for me. I personally just want to have a lot of different things going on. SSG asks, learning a lot as a new hobby reseller. Question, I don't have a store, but I've been selling on eBay for 4 months. My monthly selling limit just jumped to 5 million items and 5 million per month. Is this normal? Yeah, actually that is normal. It's so funny. I've seen a lot of y'all talking about this in the comments and in our Flipwise Discord channel and on Reddit, just about the email that you get from eBay saying, hey, your monthly limits have increased to something astronomical, like $5 million. Like, oh, great, I can now list $5 million worth of inventory. I don't know why they do this. They've been doing it for a long time, though. You can go on Google and do some searches, and you can see upwards of 10 years ago people asking this exact same question, like, why did eBay suddenly increase my selling limit to $5 million? Or I think I've even seen like $50 million. I don't know. I mean, I think they want people to list as much as possible. I don't know why they're being so specific with these astronomical numbers and emailing you about them as if it's some sort of like gift to you. Like you can now do this thing that there's no way any one of us are actually going to do. So I don't know. It is kind of a normal thing. It just means your selling limits have been increased basically to infinite numbers. SDVLT asks, I noticed a reseller writes a long list of keywords in her description box. Does that actually help the algorithm wise, or when buyers write that specific keyword even though it is not in the title? Thanks. Good question. So this used to be a common practice many, many years ago, decades ago, not just on eBay, but on websites in general, is to kind of sneak in a bunch of additional keywords in the body of your website or in the description of your eBay listing so that you attract more attention on your listing. I would say that that tactic, while you still see some sellers doing it, is an outdated tactic. I think search engines, including eBay's, are much more sophisticated these days, and they're going to do a much better job of delivering accurate results to buyers or searchers without having to rely on a list of generic keywords in the description. I don't think there's really any value in doing that these days. Think of it this way. You want your inventory to be put in front of as many people as possible that may want to buy your item. So it makes sense to use relevant keywords, and you should do that, but you should do it through the description. You should do it not hiding it in the description or listing off a bunch of irrelevant keywords. You should just do accurate titles, accurate descriptions, and accurate item details, and let eBay do the rest. eBay's entire business is generating sales through search. And so just trust that they're going to do a good job if you input the data correctly. I wouldn't try to hack it. I wouldn't try to sneak any keywords in there or anything. Just accurately describe your items and let eBay do the rest. Anthony asks, important question, do you or do you not put pineapple on pizza? I don't. Tyler asks, sometimes it will say 0 results for sold and there will be some. How do I figure out the sell-through rate when that happens? Yeah, so what Tyler's asking about here is when you search for something, sometimes it'll say nothing, no results found, but then it will give you suggested results or similar results that are of that product. And, and Tyler's asking, how do I determine sell-through rate there? So first of all, the reason that happens is because eBay's search relies on metadata being input on listings that humans have to put in there, and humans tend to make mistakes. And so that makes it difficult sometimes to produce accurate search results. And so sometimes you'll search for an item, it'll say 0 results, but it'll show some related listings that are actually the same listing. And that's probably because whoever listed that thing had a typo or used the wrong product name or the wrong model number or whatever. Almost got it right, but got it not exactly right. And in that scenario, it is difficult to calculate a sell-through rate. But on my channel, I like to advocate for sell-through rate not as a formula, a strict formula that you should use and calculate in your head or with a calculator, but sell-through rate more as a feeling, which I get that is in contrast to like mathematical equations, but I just don't think of sell-through rate as a strict formula on eBay. I use sell-through rate to get a feeling for how long something is going to take to sell. And so the way I do that is I take a look at the total number of active listings. Let's say there's 100, the total number of sold listings. Let's say that there are 10. And just in my head, I'm like, okay, well, that's not a very good sell-through rate, right? There's 100 active listings. There's 100 competitors out there. There's 10 that have sold over the last 90 days. So that's, 3 people a month on average coming by to find this item and competing against 100 other people. Like that just feels not good. That feels like a bad sell-through rate. In the reverse, let's say you have 10 actively listed and 100 sold. Well, that's a pretty good sell-through rate, right? There's only 10 available and there's, people coming by more than once a day to buy. And so you can expect that thing to sell, in a matter of days or a week, maybe not months. And so again, I'm not doing really any math at all in that scenario. I'm just getting a feel for it. Kay Goski asks, if you are just starting out, do you think it makes sense to cater towards the impossible to please buyers just to get the sale? I had one person like that I blocked on the account after the item was delivered. Granted, I specialize in retail orchid sales, which is a little different. You're right, that is a little bit different. That's an interesting category to sell on. One of the reasons I like eBay is there's so much variety in what you can buy and what you can sell and be successful in. To your question though, whether you're a new seller or an experienced seller, I never recommend that you go above and beyond for impossible to deal with buyers. There are a lot of crappy human beings out there. eBay is no different. As a seller, you're going to run into buyers who have crazy expectations, who go out of their way to make crazy demands. They kind of operate under this assumption that the buyer is always right and the seller should do everything to make the buyer happy. I'm not suggesting you don't have good customer service. You should be friendly. You should be polite. But as soon as you run into these buyers who you can tell have mismatched expectations, are going to bully you around and try to use the threat of negative feedback to get you to do whatever they want. I don't recommend that you kowtow to those types of buyers. If I run into those types of buyers before they've bought an item, I just block them immediately. I don't need their money. I don't want their money. Somebody else can buy my stuff. And if you've already sold to them and they have crazy demands, you don't need to bend over backwards for everyone. Still provide good, quick customer service, but don't meet crazy demands just to make a buyer happy, just so you won't get a negative feedback, for example. And so yeah, for a new seller, it can be kind of scary. You get a buyer who is demanding and you're afraid that they're going to give you a negative review or something. And so you try to do everything you can to prevent that, but don't do it. Just again, be polite, but don't bend over backwards. A lot of times buyers will try to force you into giving them a partial refund. Don't give partial refunds. If people aren't happy, tell them they can open up a return and send it back. And after you get it back, you can refund them. Most buyers who do that type of stuff will go away once you say you won't give them a partial refund and you require a return. So just stick up for yourself. Don't let buyers push you around. Most buyers on eBay are fine though. They're the problematic buyers. You're going to run into them if you sell enough, but they are few and far between in my experience. Candace says, I do not accept returns and never have, as it's a standard in the industry, antiques and collectibles. I regularly purchase no return items. I just read the seller's feedback, ask questions, and look at photos. A quality listing with accurate descriptions, quality goods, and exceptional customer service eliminates customer worry in the categories I sell in. So this is not a question, but Candace left a comment here that I wanted to call out because I think it's really important. In videos I've done in the past, I advocate for certain strategies like offering free returns, for example. But it's really important to remember that eBay supports such a wide variety of strategies that can be successful depending on a number of variables. And so just because you hear me say something or just because you hear another YouTuber say something does work or doesn't work, it doesn't necessarily mean it works for you or it's the best decision for your business. And so in this case, Candace is saying that, antiques and collectibles, it's sort of common that there's no returns and buyer expectations are different there, which makes total sense. And so if you're selling in a category where having returns doesn't make sense, it wouldn't be a good idea to turn returns on. So my point in calling Candace's comment out here is to remind you that take everything that I and others say with a grain of salt, do your own research, apply these strategies only if they make sense for you. I sell across all categories on eBay, a little bit of a mix of everything. And so the types of advice that I offer is sort of in line with people who do the same. It applies to other things, but it doesn't necessarily apply to all categories, for example, or all selling situations. So thanks for bringing that up, Candace. It's a good reminder to not always take advice without first thinking through whether it makes sense for your business. Celia asks, how do you track your mileage and do you figure mileage into your item cost? So I track my mileage using an app called Mile IQ. I think it's what it's called. Let me check. Yeah, Mile IQ. It's really handy. It costs $60 a year, so it is a paid product. But what it does, you keep it on your phone. It runs in the background. Every time it detects that you're moving in a car, it starts recording it. And then when it detects that you stop moving, it stops recording. And then it presents you with an interface to categorize those drives as either personal or business. It's a really slick interface. It's quick to do. So every time I get out of the car, I actually have an Apple Watch as well. It just pops up in there. It says, was that drive personal or business? I hit personal or business to categorize it. And it takes a few seconds every day, basically, to categorize all my drives. So to me, that's well worth it for $60, and I'm happy to pay for it. You also asked, I noticed some eBay sellers post lengthy policies and disclaimers with their items. Is there any benefit in that, or is it generally unnecessary and or a waste of time? The best way to think about it is eBay has a set of policies themselves. They have platform policies, and then they allow you to set your own policies on top of that. You can describe those policies in the descriptions of your items. I personally don't, because the vast majority of people just don't read those things. So I do think that it could be beneficial depending on what you sell. If the categories that you sell in and the types of items that you sell in require lengthier descriptions and calling out of very specific policies that may be outside of the norm of what a buyer expects on eBay, it could make sense to put those types of policies in there. And you can use things like eBay description templates to reduce the amount of time and effort it takes to apply those policies to all of your listings. I personally don't do it. I think most people are just not going to read it. And so I don't waste my time writing them there. And I just let the default eBay policies and the default user interface for buyers to describe those policies on the listing already do that job. But it's not going to hurt if you want to spend some time writing those things up and applying it. And I would just be prepared for most people not reading those policies. Philip asks, probably been asked a million times, but I'll ask again, do you suggest using a tool to make the background white or just placing the item on a white background? Actually, nobody's asked that question here on the channel, so happy to answer it. I personally prefer not removing the backgrounds from my photos, and I do that on purpose. I just think photos with the background removed look weird. They look out of context, and it's hard to determine lighting when the background's been removed. I just think it looks weird, and as a buyer, when I'm looking at items through eBay search and I see things within a floating white background, and it just looks weird. To me, it looks better when it's a well-photographed item on a clean background. It doesn't even need to be white, in my opinion. I know a lot of sellers think that the algorithm favors white backgrounds. I just don't think it really does. Plenty of things sell all the time without having a white background. I've definitely seen some very nice looking backgrounds. And in fact, I tend to use different backgrounds depending on the item. Like I sold a lawn chair not that long ago. Rather than put that on a white background, I photographed it out in the grass in its natural environment, which I just thought would do a better job of selling it. So anyway, I do think products look good on nice, clean white backgrounds. I do not think it looks good when you artificially remove the background and use a stark white background. So I don't do that. Spencer asks, hey, I love your videos. Thank you. I've been reselling full-time out of college for about 2 years now, mostly selling in the men's clothing category. This isn't really a reselling related question, but I would love to hear more of your background in product and software. My entrepreneurial spirit has gotten me interested in building a business startup in the future and would love to hear a bit of your story. Thanks. Sure, Spencer. Happy to share a little bit of that. So I grew up in the 90s. Ever since I was 12 or 13, I was making websites on the internet back in the mid 90s. And I've continued to do that throughout my adult life. I've done it professionally for the last 25 years or so in a variety of capacities. I started off as an engineer, like a web developer, sort of a front end, what you would call today a front end web developer. But over the years, I sort of lost interest in the engineering side of it. And I was more interested in the product side of it, the product management side of it. And so from a career perspective, I spent the last 2 decades or so doing product management in sort of the media space, the digital media space, things like news organizations, blogs, online magazines, things like that, helping to build tools for journalists to create stories on the internet. And so that's really been the focus of my career for a long time. But I've always had side projects going. I've always built stuff on the side. In fact, Flipwise started off as a side project, really that was like spreadsheet based. And then it was based in a product called Airtable. And then I partnered with my friend Michael to start to build it into an application of its own. And so I've just always been doing that type of stuff, for the last 25 years or so. Bill Cooper asks, we have a buyer who wants to return something, but insists on mailing the package back, asking for our address instead of opening a return request. We've asked several times, but they won't do it. And the return window of 30 days is almost up. What would you do? I think you're doing the right thing here. You should continue to tell the buyer if they want to open a return, there's a process for how to do that. And that is to open up a return through eBay, and they will then be given a shipping label and that can be sent back to you in that case. And so there's nothing wrong with enforcing the policies that exists for sellers and buyers on eBay. If they don't know how to do that, maybe you could, if you really felt nice, you could walk them through how to do it. You could tell them to contact eBay. There's plenty of information out there. Somebody can figure it out in 5 minutes if they just open up the website or open up the app on their phone. They can find their order and find the return button and go through that process. And this buyer is just being a little bit unreasonable, and you should not go out of your way to give them your personal address or do anything really outside of what eBay requires that you do. So hopefully they do that before the return window is closed, because if it's closed, then they may not have the option to do it, or you're not bound by eBay policy to accept the return. You could still accept it if you're feeling nice, but you don't have to. ADJ Hunts asks, is there a way to get a listing reinstated that was removed for a product safety reason? It was a replacement blade for a recalled food processor blade for a Cuisinart DLC8. I've sold the same style blade twice in the past with no issues, and there are multiple of them listed now, but they removed mine. I called and the eBay rep was not helpful. I tried explaining the blade I'm listing isn't the recalled blade, but that it replaced the recalled blade, but she didn't seem to care. Yeah, so this is definitely an issue. I've had this exact same issue with Cuisinart blades specifically. In fact, I've only had an eBay account suspension happen once, and it was because I sold one of these recalled blades from Cuisinart. So personally, I just stay away from them entirely. Even if they're not the recalled blades, I just don't sell any blades from Cuisinart at all because I've already had a ding on my account related to it, and I don't want to get another one, and I don't want to risk a more permanent suspension of my eBay account. Like selling one blade is just not worth it for me. So anytime I get a blade, I just redonate it. I don't try to sell it. And I would recommend you do the same. But it is kind of frustrating because you see lots of other listings live, even for the recalled blades, and lots of other listings sold for the recalled blades, but yours gets picked out for some reason and you get a ding on your account. It's one of the negative things about the whole VeRO program is just it seems like a crapshoot whether eBay is going to care or not. And so that's why I just don't risk it. I just don't sell anything related to a thing that I've been previously dinged on my account for. Casey asks, how should I set my payouts? So Casey, I think what you're asking about is how often eBay will pay you the money that you've earned. And I think you can set it on a daily basis, a weekly basis, maybe a monthly basis. Personally, I set mine at the weekly basis. I find it easier to do bookkeeping once a week versus once a day and keeping up with it in that way. So that's my personal preference, but maybe if you need access to the money more frequently, daily would make sense, or less frequently, monthly would make sense. But I personally stick with the weekly payouts every Tuesday. Zola asks, what are the pros and cons to leaving sold items in place with a quantity of 0? I do it mostly so that I can use the listing later for sell similar for an indefinite amount of time. Now I'm wondering if that makes me look like I have a ton of listings with low activity, which would ding my store in the algorithm. Thoughts? Yeah, so the question here is referring to a setting on eBay where you can make it so that your listings, when they sell, they remain active. And so it just shows up on eBay as an active listing, but a quantity of 0 and sold out. And there are some benefits to doing that if you plan to replenish the supply of inventory for that particular product. Let's say you have a multi-quantity listing that has 10 items in it. You sell out of those 10 items. You can, configure eBay to not close that listing, but keep that listing active and be out of stock because you plan on restocking it later. And that is the benefit, is because you can sort of build long-term value on this listing by keeping it active even when it's out of stock, so that you can keep replenishing it without having to recreate the listing and sort of start from scratch. Long-standing listings may be more valuable in search than newer listings for the same item. But this is diving into territory where I don't know the answer. Nobody knows the answer except for eBay. They just don't divulge these types of particulars about how their algorithm operates. So whether leaving a bunch of listings active with 0 units has a negative effect on your account from an algorithm perspective, I don't know. I don't imagine it would. But again, eBay doesn't make that information freely available. So I can't comment one way or the other with a definitive answer. And neither can anyone else except for eBay, and I doubt they will. I personally think it's kind of messy to do that, to have a bunch of active listings that aren't actually active and can't actually be sold unless I was going to replenish them. So I don't do that at all. And I would recommend you do the same for that reason. You can sell similar off of all sorts of items, not just your own. You can sell similar off of other people's items. And so having your item to sell similar from, in case you happen to get a duplicate later, I just think it's not that valuable because you can sell similar off of any number of listings out there that are similar. It doesn't have to be your own. All right, a couple similar questions here. Adam asks, I'm still curious about the views on my items going down. I understand it only displays views in the last 30 days, but I have an item that is listed only 4 days ago that showed 12 views yesterday, and now it only shows 8. Yeah, so what Adam's referring to is a question that I had in a previous video about why the number of views on your inventory on eBay go down, like the page views, the number of people that have viewed them go down. And my explanation for that was that it's a rolling 30 days, the total number of views. And so it's only accounting for the last 30 days. And so once a day moves off from being the last 30, it's no longer counted. And that causes the total number of views for a product in your inventory to go up and down. But what Adam's question is, and there's another question similar, this guy says, okay, buddy, then why do my total views for a certain day go down over the next few days? It'll say 650 views on Sunday night, but by Sunday's views say 590. Same goes for impressions. Why is eBay lying to us? Seems criminal. Right, so the question is slightly different. It's not the last 30 days of views, but it's like, hey, on this specific day, on Sunday, it said there was 500 views. Then a few days later, I checked Sunday's views and it said there was only 480. It was like 20 views missing. What's the deal? And so while I would love for this to be a huge conspiracy theory, the reality is companies that work with large amounts of data like this and page view data like this, for example, have to do some normalizing of that data. And so in eBay's case, what they're doing is after the fact, they're removing views that come from non-humans. It has systems in place to go back and say, okay, of these 500 views, we detected that 10 of them came from bot activity and were not humans, and so we're going to cut those out. To you, as the seller, appears that the total number of views that you have gotten have shrunk based on what they told you before. The reality is you never had those views in the first place. It was a robot hitting your listing to do something, to scrape data from it or something like that. So, and eBay does talk about this on their website here under how machine or bot traffic is removed from your listings. It says filtering is done in 2 stages. Bot traffic is identified and removed from your page view count in near real time, and a secondary filter process performs a deeper analysis on a daily basis and removes bot traffic that may have not been caught in the initial filtering, and this can cause your page views to decrease. I'd love for it to be a conspiracy, but it's not a conspiracy. It's just some data normalization going on. The next question here is, how detailed do you go for sell-through? Should I list certain things on one platform and other things on another? How to cut the things bogging down your inventory? Should I make different stores for different niches? How can AI help me? So I'll just jump into all of these. So the first one, how detailed do you go for sell-through? So I'm not exactly sure what you mean by how detailed, but for almost everything that I buy, I check the sell-through rate unless I know it's going to be good and don't need to check it. But I check the active listings and I check the sold listings on eBay, and I compare those 2 numbers. And so that's the sell-through rate, right? And so if there's 100 active listings and 100 sold listings, that's 100% sell-through rate. The data for eBay and the app goes back 90 days. So that means there's 100 active listings. That's your competition. There's 100 sold listings. So a little bit over 1 per day are going to sell. And so that's a pretty good sell-through rate. 100% is great. The higher the sold compared to the active, that's what you're shooting for. And so I don't really go any deeper than that, though. The other question was, should I list certain things on one platform and other things on another? I don't have a ton of experience on other platforms. I primarily focus on eBay. I certainly list some things like on Facebook Marketplace that are larger and I don't want to deal with shipping. If you have specialty items, if you're selling sneakers, for example, there might be other platforms that are better for sneaker selling than eBay. Personally, I put everything on eBay, so I can't really help you much with that question. How to cut things down bogging your inventory. So I occasionally will groom some older stuff out of my inventory, but it's really about your own physical space. So if you have a ton of storage space for your inventory, that maybe you don't care about it being bogged down. But if you have, a spare bedroom and it's getting overcrowded with inventory, you probably want to go through that older inventory more regularly to cut down. I would just go through and I would look, and things that have not sold for a long time, I would recheck the sell-through rate. Maybe there's a reason it's not selling. If there's a ton that are selling, but yours isn't, maybe you have it priced wrong, but maybe you just made a bad buy. Maybe it's not going to sell for a really long time and you just want to get it out of there. And, that's a good way to do it. So don't just cut things, but do some research before you cut them. Make sure that they are worth getting rid of first. Should I make different stores for different niches? I think running multiple stores is going to add a layer of complexity to your overall management. It's not horrible, but if I was selling, one specific category of items and that was the only thing I sold and I was really trying to build up repeat customers, I might, throw everything together in one store like that. Your last question was, how can AI help me? I think AI has a lot of hype in the AI space. Certainly there are areas that it can help you a lot. I've been toying with the AI description in eBay. It works pretty well. I don't think many people read descriptions anyway, but it's a quick way to get words into your description that are fairly accurate. And so I've been using that and testing it out. I don't think it's had much of an impact on sales. I've messed around using ChatGPT for titles and things like that. But again, I think the value that you get from getting an optimized title is sort of offset by the amount of time that you're spending to do that. It's not well integrated into eBay, obviously. I don't know of any other listing tools out there that are deeply integrating AI in that sort of way. I just don't think it's that useful. I have not done extensive testing, though, and so it may become more useful over time, but personally, I don't really mess with it. I find that just using my own organic human brain to come up with good keywords is a fair enough way to do it. So, but you should definitely experiment with it. You may find that it works better and increases sales. So definitely give it a shot. All right. The next question here. I hear a lot of sellers saying they list 5 items a day to get into the algorithm's good side. If this is true, does it need to be every single day, or can it be 10 listings every other day, or 15 listings every 3 days, and so on and so forth? Thanks in advance. I definitely subscribe to the idea that listing regularly and daily is a good thing to stay in the good graces of eBay's algorithm. Personally, I try to list at least a few things every day. 5 is my number. I don't always hit it, but I usually do. If I had a bunch of listings saved up that were ready to be published, I probably would not publish them all in the same day, and I would space them out over many days just to have constant new things going into my store. I would recommend the same thing. That's my recommendation. I don't have a whole lot of data to back any of that up, but I think it's good to be constantly listing as much as you can, as frequently as you can, and take as little time off as you can to keep that eBay algorithm happy. All right, the next question. I try to list 50 to 70 items weekly, but my death pile is slowly dwindling away on weeks I don't find as many items that I list. Have you ever bought pallets of inventory? And if so, what website do you recommend? So yes, I have bought pallets of inventory, but I've only done it locally, and that's what I would recommend to you. I think there's just so many scams out there, and you just never know what you're really going to get when you buy a pallet of inventory online. I'm not saying you can't find good deals or that there aren't some good people out there selling pallets of inventory online, but personally, I want to inspect what I'm going to get. But even doing it locally, I'm just not a big fan of buying pallets of inventory unless you really know what you're going to get. And so things like Amazon return pallets are really fun to open up and go through and be surprised by some of the cool stuff that you get. But it's almost like buying a giant mystery box. You just don't know what you're going to get. You may get 50 things that you can resell and make $5,000 on it, or you may get 5 things that you can resell. I just don't think it's worth the risk, really. I've gotten burned on some, even going and picking them up locally. They look like good pallets. I can peek in there. I can see some valuable things. Once you get it home and take all the stuff off the pallet, they're 75% sort of Chinese brandless junk from Amazon that just has no value on the secondary market. So it's really hit or miss. And I personally just don't really like buying Amazon return pallets, but I have bought pallets of like Kohler returns, and it's just 100% Kohler faucets and shower heads and things like that. And that's been really successful for me. So again, there's definitely going to be pallets that are better than others, but I would avoid the Amazon return pallets. Again, very fun to open, but not always the most lucrative. All right, next question. Do you ever try to test stuff out before you buy it? Like finding an outlet somewhere, carrying batteries with you or something like that, especially if you know it won't sell for parts only? Definitely. Most thrift stores have a little area where you can take something electronic and plug it in and make sure it works. I definitely have taken advantage of that and used it. I've never carried batteries. That's a pretty good idea. I should probably do that. But yeah, definitely test the stuff out if you can. Some thrift stores, allow returns after they usually give you a window of time of a few days if you get it home and the electronics are not working. So in those situations, I don't typically take the time to test in stores that allow returns, because I just take it home and I'm going to go back to that thrift store in a few days, likely to buy new inventory. So it's easy enough for me to take that inventory back if it doesn't work. But I would definitely recommend testing stuff. Carrying batteries sounds like a good idea. Next question. Is there any way to add hidden keywords or SEO in the description if the HTML option is used? I don't think you need to worry about adding hidden keywords. I would suggest just adding relevant keywords and not hiding them. I think most search engines, eBay included, I would guess, have evolved beyond the point where the sort of hidden keywords are an effective tactic these days. And so I really wouldn't mess with any hidden keywords. I would just focus on making sure that your listing has relevant keywords in the title and in the description. There's really no reason to hide them. It puts into question, why would you be hiding those keywords in the first place? Is it because they're not relevant to the thing that you're selling? And if that's the case, like, why are you trying to get that sort of traffic to that listing? So I would just focus on super relevant keywords in the title and the description and the metadata as well for your listings, and leave it at that. I think that's going to be the most effective thing to do. All right. How do you manage your time so well? I don't. First, I have 4 kids, make YouTube videos, but have a full-time job. Between the kids, my job, and editing, it's almost impossible to be consistent. Any tips for managing editing, family, and work life? I wish I had the answer there. It's definitely tough. I find being, my way of being consistent is to schedule things. Like, I'm sitting down and I'm doing this video and talking to y'all right now because I put it on my calendar and I said I was going to do it. And so here I am and I'm doing it. I'm going to sit down after this and I'm going to edit it and get it ready to go and publish out tomorrow. But I'm a heavy user of to-do lists. I use Todoist, which is a Mac application. I also keep a notebook around just to write other things down when I need to. But it can be really hard. I set goals. I'm publishing 2 videos a week. And so I usually publish one on Mondays and then one on Thursdays or Fridays. That means I have to have a set schedule for when I film those and when I edit those, and I put those all on the calendar. I put them on my to-do list. I try to list at least 5 things a day on eBay, and I put that on my calendar and I put that on my to-do list, and so I can check it off when it's done. And so I just being organized about what I'm trying to accomplish on a day-to-day basis, and then grinding it out, getting it done. There's really no secret other than that. And so, but it can be really tough to balance all that and, still have time to spend with your family. And, but it can be really hard. So I I definitely commiserate with you there. All right, next question. I've heard other reselling YouTubers say that you could make a full-time living reselling from any small town. I'm from Montana, Helena specifically, and I'm wondering if you agree with this. Yeah, definitely. I think, you're in a smaller town, you're definitely going to be more limited in finding inventory than you would be in a larger town, whether that's going on Facebook, going to garage sales, going to thrift stores. Like there's just less of those things in less populated areas, obviously. But everyone is on an even playing field when it comes to sourcing online. And so I'm not a big online sourcer personally. Part of why I like reselling is the hunt. I like going out to these places and hunting around and finding things. And it's just hard to get that same effect when you're sourcing online. But tons of people are sourcing exclusively online, exclusively on eBay even, and making a ton of money flipping it back on eBay, or sourcing from a variety of other places online and flipping it online as well. And so it doesn't matter if you live in a small town or big town to be able to do that. And so you should seek out some YouTubers who are specifically doing that type of reselling content. I'm not, so I don't have a whole lot to offer, but I do agree with it. You can definitely do it. You can make it work anywhere. So next question, for eBay only, when you started, how many items were you allowed to list? How long before they raised that limit? Did it go smoothly? And currently, have eBay made changes to those guidelines? Oof, I'm a horrible person to ask that question, unfortunately. My current account dates back to 2006. I have no idea how many things I could list back in 2006. I have to assume that eBay has definitely evolved those guidelines over time, and I don't even know what they are right now. I've never looked. I think you can request to get more listings. I don't know, but look, if you're just getting started on eBay, I would focus on a couple things, right? Set up your eBay account. Work with the listings that they give you, source all of your inventory from things around your house. Everybody has stuff in their house that has some value and they no longer use. So instead of donating it, instead of giving it away, list it on eBay. That'll give you practice. That'll help you with the listing process. It'll help you figure out shipping. You won't have to spend any money on sourcing, and you'll get money back to actually seed into those future sourcing trips. And so definitely do that. And I would check eBay's website. All that stuff's going to be documented pretty well. Unfortunately, it's just been, almost 20 years since I signed up for an eBay account. And so my information is pretty dated when it comes to that. What's the smallest margin you will sell for? I don't really think of it that way, to be honest. When I'm outsourcing, I'm not going to buy things that are only going to net me a few dollars, because it just is not worth the time that it takes for me to list and, photograph and inventory it and then ship it for only a few dollars. Sometimes I buy things and think they're going to be worth more, and they only end up being worth a few dollars. But if I'm out there sourcing and it's only going to make me a few dollars, I don't do it. I have a rule. It's not like a perfect math rule, but it's easy to do in your head when you're outsourcing, which is like the 3X rule. I don't know if I think I may have made it up. I don't know. It's not a real rule by any means, but if I pick up something for $10, I need to be able to sell it gross for $30 for it to be worth my while, for it to basically double my money. It's not perfect. It doesn't scale. The more expensive the product, the less that rule works, but it's just a good rule of thumb. Am I going to be able to sell this for $30 if I paid 10 for it? If so, okay, I'll probably make about $10 on it after all fees and taxes and shipping. So that's usually kind of what I have in my head when I'm out there, but I don't mind selling cheaper stuff. I like to keep things moving. I like going out and hunting and finding weird stuff. And sometimes it's just fun to buy unique, weird things that other people are going to seek out and want to buy out there. And, sometimes those aren't super expensive things. And so for me, it's more a part of the culture of what I like doing. All right. Next question here. Hi, do you ever get rid of items that don't sell? Yes. If so, how long do you generally wait? Depends. Thanks. So yeah, I do go through every once in a while, probably not as much as I should, but it really depends on your storage. How much physical storage location do you have? If you have a ton and you don't mind stuff sitting around, your tolerance for slow selling things is going to be higher. If you are selling out of an apartment and you are putting everything in the corner of one bedroom, you may not want to fill that bedroom up with a bunch of garbage. And so your tolerance is going to be lower for slower selling things, and you're going to want to churn through that stuff more quickly. So I'm really fortunate that I have a pretty big basement that a good portion of it is set aside for reselling specifically. And so I have things that are many years old. It just doesn't bother me. And I still sell things that are many years old. And so if I started to run out of space, I would probably care more about going through older inventory and getting rid of it. But right now I just don't really care that much. And so I don't get rid of a whole lot of things unless I'm just like, this thing is definitely not going to sell. I'm just going to get rid of it. But almost anything is going to sell eventually, I've found. I've only been selling on eBay eBay for about 6 months. I'm retiring in 9 months from the trades, and I have a lot of tools that I won't need anymore. My initials are engraved on the tools. Should I sell as is or grind off the initials first? I don't want people to think that they are stolen. Well, that's interesting. Let's see. If I'm a buyer and I'm buying tools, do I care about that? Probably not. If I'm getting a pretty good deal on a tool and it has somebody's initials on it, I'm like, okay, cool, whatever. Whether it's grinded out or not, I think if you're like grinding the serial numbers off, that would be a little sketchy. But if you're just grinding off your initials, I don't think most buyers are going to care. I would just disclose that in the listing and make sure there's a picture of whether it's your initials still on there or you have used the grinder on them to get rid of them. Disclose it in the picture, make sure people know it's there, and let them decide whether they want to buy a tool with that on it or not. When you sell a personal item, do you put your purchase price, what you paid for it, or do you do market value? This is a really good question. I see this question pop up every once in a while. I'll preface my answer with I may not be doing what is right from a tax perspective. So this is not tax advice. You should definitely do your own research. What I do when I'm selling personal items is I even it out. I make it so that I make no money on it. And so after all fees, taxes, and shipping, if I've made $17.26 selling, this Yeti mug right here, I would just make my cost of goods $17.26 or whatever I just said, so that it evens out and I just didn't make any money and I didn't lose any money. So that's how I do it. But if you bought something, for $100 and you turned around and tried to sell it and, only made 80, you definitely want to record that properly because that's a $20 loss. And that'll lower your overall taxable income with the IRS, and you won't be taxed on that, that $20 that you lost. And so, all right, next question. My death piles are out of control. Welcome to the club. I only source on high bid auctions and I rarely go to thrift stores or garage sales. I was wondering, because I have so much stuff, should I only be listing all the high dollar stuff first? Should I just donate things I might only make $10 or less profit on? I feel bad doing that. I like having a mix of both. Sometimes I might have a lower item someone is looking for. If the item is a low dollar and I see that the market is saturated, should I just donate the item? So a lot going on here, but it's all personal preference. If you don't mind making $10 on something and packing it up and ship it off, why donate it? You might as well get it out there. I think the part that stuck out of me in your question was, if the item is low dollar and I see the market is saturated, should I just donate it? Yeah, I think so. Like if you have an item that's only going to make you $10, but there's 1,500 listed and 12 sold over the last 90 days, like that thing is not going to sell for many years. You're probably better off just donating it. And so that's what I would recommend. Also, I know it's tax time, and as usual, I'm not prepared for it. I have my high bid receipts for the year, and I can figure out expenses, but I really don't know what I'm doing when it comes to taxes. Well, I'm not a tax expert, and I definitely don't give tax advice. The only advice I would give you here is to hire an accountant. They're actually not that expensive. I spend about $250 a year on my accountant, and I get to send them everything. I can send them all my receipts, all my data, and they just make sense of it and put all the tax stuff together, prep it, and send it off to the IRS. And it's the best money I spend all year, and it's a tax write-off. So definitely recommend doing that. It is worth it. If you're making more than a couple $1,000s reselling, just spend a small fraction of that hiring an accountant to make sure that you're doing it correctly. It's just money well spent. That's what I recommend. Next question. How do you handle getting multiple offers, but at the same price on an item? I don't think that's ever happened to me. Wow. I don't know if I've ever had multiple offers at the same time, let alone multiple offers at the same time with the same price. So I guess if I did, I would just accept the first one that comes in if I wanted to accept it at that price. If not, I guess I would counter each of them at the exact same and let them duke it out to see whoever might want to take it. But I don't know, never run into that problem. All right, next one here. I had an item listed and I had 4 available. Someone purchased all 4 and the calculated shipping is way off. They charged the buyer not nearly enough. My dimensions and weight for 1 is accurate. Interesting. I think I know what you're saying. I think you're saying you had a multi-quantity listing and somebody bought all 4 of them, and you would have expected that it combined, the dimensions or at least the weight of all 4 to do calculated shipping. I don't know how eBay handles calculated shipping in that scenario. I never use eBay's calculated shipping. That's interesting. I could sort of see why that would be a problem, especially if it's a heavy item. I would recommend asking eBay directly. That's another thing too, is I think people run into all sorts of issues on eBay and sort of seek out forums or YouTube for answers, when actually calling eBay, if you can figure out how to get them on the phone, which can be kind of difficult. But once you do get them on the phone, they're actually very helpful. They almost always resolve my problems, and I always almost always walk away feeling pretty good. If I get a representative on the phone who is not helpful, like I just, oh, thank you, have a good day, hang up, and then try again until I get someone who is helpful. And I have a lot of luck there. So I would just call eBay and pitch that to them. For this buyer, I'd probably just eat the cost. They already bought it. I wouldn't cancel the order unless you're like losing a ton of money on it. But yeah, call eBay, see what they tell you to do there. All right, next question. Are you 100% buy it now, or do you auction items? So I'm not 100% buy it now, but I'm probably 99.99% buy it now. I have an entire separate video on when to use auctions versus buy it nows. I'll link it up top and down in the description below. But yeah, I almost always use buy it nows, and very rarely do I use auctions. So yeah, watch that other video. I go into detail about why I use buy it nows all the time and rarely use auctions. All right, next one. I was wondering if you do mentoring. My girlfriend and I live close to you. We just started. Please let us know. Thank you. I don't do mentoring. People reach out to me about this every once in a while. I feel like it would just be very difficult for me to do it in a way that is valuable to y'all. Besides these, YouTube videos. These YouTube videos scale, right? I get to like record this one time and broadcast it out to thousands of people, and so that's easy to do. If I was doing one-on-one mentoring, I feel like I would just have to charge a lot of money to make it valuable for the end user and valuable for me. And it's just in this business, it's already hard to make money in this business anyway. And so I just can't imagine somebody wanting to spend hundreds of dollars for me to mentor them. And so I'm not opposed to it necessarily. I think it would be kind of fun, but I just feel like I would have to charge a lot to make it worth my while and make it possible for me to provide a level of service that would be useful for someone. And so I don't see myself doing it in the future, but maybe I'll figure something out. I don't know. All right, next question. There's kind of two related questions. What items are the most risky for negative feedback, and also how to get negative feedback removed? I'll just say, negative feedback as a seller on eBay used to be, really important to avoid. Now it just doesn't matter. If you're a upstanding seller and you do the right thing and you work hard and you do your best to make your customers happy and you ship things on time and you pack them well and you describe your items well, that's what you should focus on. If you sell enough, you're going to get negative feedback. It's just going to happen. It's unavoidable. There are people out there who just don't care, and you can't make them happy. And so the way I approach it now is that it's just going to happen. Who cares? This year I've gotten 4 negative feedbacks. Like, it hasn't impacted my business one bit. I've stopped even trying to get it removed. It's just not worth it for me. I just don't care that much, and it doesn't impact my business. And so I don't think there are any categories that are more risky for negative feedback. And there is a tool to get negative feedback removed. I forget what it is. I'll link it in the description below, though. It's pretty easy. You can submit it for removal. eBay will then look at it and say, okay, sure, or not. If your buyer is extorting you for feedback, that's a good reason to get it removed. But I typically don't bother with it. It just doesn't impact it, and I suggest you do the same. All right, the next question: do views on an item have any impact on sales? If I have an item with 100 views and no sales, should I be ending the listing and relisting the item? So I have another video on this as well. I'll link it up top and down below. But generally, watchers are not necessarily a good indicator of whether it's going to sell or not. I mean, everything's going to sell eventually. But I've got things with hundreds of watchers that still haven't sold. I sell things every day that have 0 watchers on them. And so it's just not a good indicator of demand or the likelihood to sell in any sort of specific amount of time. And so I don't think it's necessarily a good reason to be ending and relisting the item. By the way, I'm working on a video separately about the concept of ending and relisting and whether you should do it and how you should do it. And so I'll save a lot of my answers about that for that video that's going to come out in a few weeks, but I just don't think watchers really matter all that much. And I often end listings that have a bunch of watchers on it, and they get a bunch of watchers on it again. So it's just I don't think it's really damaging at all to do that. So I think you can end and relist sort of whether you have a lot of watchers or not. I don't think it matters. All right, last question here. Are you monetized on YouTube? If so, do you think their payments, the RPMs, are fair? And do you ever think you could make as much money on YouTube as your full-time job? So yeah, happy to talk about monetization. I've been monetized on YouTube for about 6 months. I think in July, I hit that mark. You have to have at least 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 watch hours in order to get monetization turned on YouTube. And that just means you start getting a cut of the ads that are shown on your videos. And so if I go into my channel dashboard here and into the analytics and into my revenue, and change it to lifetime, you'll see here that since July, I've made $7,708.35. And so you can see here, I've been publishing videos for years without making any money on it. And then, this past summer, I finally had enough subscribers to get monetization turned on. And there it is. And so, not bad. $7,700, over the course of 6 months or so. What is that? A little over $1,000 per month. Not bad, but honestly, the amount of time that I put into YouTube vastly outweighs the money that I make. It's just, I'm sure I'm making like pennies an hour doing it. So if you're interested in getting into YouTube, don't do it because you're going to make a ton of money. Maybe you will, but it's going to take forever. And so do it because you like making videos, because you like reaching out to people and connecting with them in this way. That should be your motivation for starting a YouTube channel if you want to, not because you're going to, become rich. And so I definitely don't make as much money on YouTube as I make on reselling. Let's take a look at that here. We can see over that same period, what did I say, July? Yeah, so in that same time period on eBay, I made $24,000. So that's gross. Again, that's not net. That's $24,231 versus, what did I say, $7,700 on YouTube. And so, I've made about a third less money on YouTube than I've made on eBay. So I was wondering if you could go over your inventory strategy and storage system. So my inventory strategy and storage system, I have a bunch of shelves. I have maybe 15 different shelves. On those shelves, I put banker boxes and I put my products inside of those banker boxes, or sometimes I just put them directly on the shelves. Each shelf has a letter. So this is like shelf A, this is shelf B, shelf C, and so on. Each shelf obviously has like a level to it or a shelf to it. And so I give those numbers. And so like the very bottom shelf is number 1, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to the top. And then the banker boxes have letters. And so if you see like A2A, that means that it's on shelf A, level 2, and it's the A box. And I also have A2B for the B box. So that's my general just like inventory strategy system. And so when I list something new, I go and I put it on the shelf, and then I go back into my inventory management system and I assign that particular bin or shelf to that product. You also asked to use a spreadsheet. I started using a spreadsheet. Right now I use a product that I actually built with a friend of mine called Flipwise. Some of y'all have watched my videos. You've seen this around. It's not yet open to the public, but it will be soon. And so if you're interested, you can follow this link here. It's just www.flipwise.app. It automates all of the sales ingestion. So I don't have to do any manual data entry when something sells. It pulls in all the, how much it sold for. It pulls in all the platform fees, all of the shipping costs, all of the promotional fees, anything else. So it automatically calculates all of the stuff that you need. It also stores my inventory location. So when something sells, I just pull it up, and I go find it and ship it off. What are your thoughts on pre-packaging items as you list them as opposed to packing them as you sell them? So I do not pre-package my items as I list them. I really try to focus on really fast listing processes. So I have a separate video that's, how to list anything in 4 minutes or less. The more you can list, the more you're going to sell. And so the more work you have to do when you're listing, the less you're going to list. There's some other reasons why I don't prepackage stuff as well either, but I don't know what box it's going to go into. I don't know how it's going to get shipped. It may be, I wouldn't necessarily put it in a free priority shipping box because it may not ship priority, but it may ship priority depending on who buys it. And so there's a whole bunch of reasons why you wouldn't want to prepackage it necessarily. It's also going to take up more space from an inventory perspective. So lots of reasons. But if you prepackage it and it works for you, go for it. I just doesn't make much sense for me. Okay, so the next one is, you have mentioned in the past that your wife helps you with eBay. What aspects of eBay reselling does she work with you on? So yes, she does. We do this together. It's a lot of fun. It's like, sometimes we go on date nights to thrift stores and stuff like that. We both just really enjoy doing it. So it's a good way to bond and spend some time together and also make money. So it works out well. So we definitely go out sourcing together a lot, which is really great because it's like kind of like two brains at one time. She has knowledge of categories that I have no idea. She has like women's clothing brands. I just have no clue, what they are, but she's really good at that type of thing. And vice versa. Like I have a bunch of knowledge and things that she doesn't know. So when we both go out sourcing together, we sort of come home with twice as much stuff sometimes. So that's pretty nice. She also handles the shipping most of the time, which is great. She is weird and likes shipping stuff. So I I'm glad to let her take that stuff over. I'm not a huge fan of shipping, so she's really good at it too. She just like takes the time to be very careful with packing and make sure that everything, is not going to break. And, I am careful too, but I tend to sort of rush through things, and sometimes my quality is not as good as hers. So I'm very happy that she does the shipping. You also asked, and when you go to the thrift store, what sections on your must checklist, like electronics, toys, etc. I really go for everything. So I sell across all categories. So there's no part of a thrift store that I would not go to. So I tend to go to electronics first because that's what I know the best. And that tends to be where a lot of like high dollar items are. And so I go there first. I usually leave clothes till last, but I found that there's typically not like a ton of people always browsing through the clothes, whereas there's usually more people in the hard goods section. So I want to go there first and make sure that I get everything that I can. And then I'll just go over to clothing later and browse and spend more time through clothing. So I don't discriminate at all. Anything that's going to make money. And so I usually span the entire thrift store section to section. Okay. Have you ever had an item so heavy that you had to ship it through a freight company? If so, which one do you recommend? I don't think so. I think I've shipped something with a freight company one time, and it wasn't something that I was reselling. I was sending a poker table to my brother. And that was like 15 years ago. So I unfortunately cannot help you with that. I don't know. Maybe if you know in the comments, like let us know some good freight companies, and the person that asked this question can check it out. Okay. Let's see, this next one, if I remember correctly, you often start your drafts from the phone, load your photos directly into the draft, and finish the listing later. Yes, so I walk through my entire listing process in that video, how to list anything in 4 minutes or less, and that is my process where I start my drafts. Actually, no, it's different, sorry. I don't start my draft from the phone. I start my draft from the computer, and then I basically fill out all of the information from a desktop computer because I'm much faster on a desktop computer. And then once I have a bunch of drafts saved, then I open my phone up. I get the phone, I walk over to my photo station, I open up the draft, and I take photos, and then publish from my phone. So again, that other video, I'll link it up top and down below, shows all of that process end to end, so you can see that. But what are you asking? It's not, you didn't actually ask a question there, but your question is, once your listings are complete, do you transfer your photos to your computer? And if so, how do you organize them, and how long do you hold on to them? No, I don't. I don't transfer anything to the computer at all. That's the beauty of using the phone, actually, is because I can just upload directly from the eBay app to the eBay listing, and I just don't have a local copy of those photos at all. And I can't think of a reason why I would want a local copy of those. Maybe you have a process or what you're selling, there's a reason to. But I don't. So I don't organize them, and I don't keep them. They just stay on eBay, and that's where they stay. Hi, Justin. Do you consider yourself a part-time reseller? If so, what do you consider tips as far as how you're able to maximize your time that you spend on eBay? So yes, I definitely consider myself a part-time reseller. I have a full-time job, and so my time is limited, and I have to find like quirky times to actually fit this stuff in. And so I've had a lot of success by just establishing routines. And so I go to the same thrift store every Tuesday evening. I go to garage sales every Saturday. I go to the same flea market every Sunday. So I have like from a sourcing perspective, I have a very set routine where I go and source during those specific times. Same with listing. I'll set aside, so I'll like literally put a time on my calendar. I'll put an hour on there when I know that I'm not going to be disturbed, like after work or before work. And then I'll go and list stuff. And I try to list at least 5 things per day. It's not really specific to eBay or reselling, but just like time management, I guess, is what you want to focus on. That find times that work well for you. Also, like when sourcing, so I'll like drop my kids off at volleyball practice and quickly run to a thrift store. So it's like finding times to like sneak it in like that. I think is really going to help if you're pressed for time, if you have a full-time job and you're trying to do this on the side. So what's next? Okay, so there's 2 questions that are related, so I'll group these together. I was wondering if you had looked into eBay Live at all, and if so, what your thoughts are on it, and if you've ever thought about selling on Whatnot. I actually don't even know what eBay Live is. I'm assuming it's like a competitor to Whatnot from eBay. Never used it as a buyer or a seller, so I have nothing to contribute there, but I'll look it up and I'll check it out. I have thought about selling on Whatnot. I have an account, but I've never done anything with it. So I don't know. I get the feeling that even though I have like somewhat of a following on YouTube, does that translate over to Whatnot? Like, are y'all going to come to my Whatnot and just buy the random stuff that I pick up? It seems weird. It seems like more if I was like only sold, shoes, or only sold, Magic the Gathering cards or something like that, that it would make more sense. But I don't know, maybe people do just buy general stuff off of Whatnot. So that shows my ignorance when it comes to the platform. I just don't know it all that well. So some other related ones here. Do you sell on other platforms? What's your best approach to sell old inventory? So do I sell on other platforms besides eBay? Not really. When I happen to buy something that's big and difficult to ship, I will list it on Facebook Marketplace, but I hate selling on Facebook Marketplace, so I really avoid it. So you also asked, what is your best approach to sell old inventory? Markdown sale, coupon, or other? My best approach to selling old inventory is to end and relist. I do a lot of ending and relisting, and I need to do a video on this, but a lot of people ask me, should I get an eBay store? And so an eBay store typically comes with a larger allotment of listings per month. And even though I don't list that much per month, I do pay for an eBay store because I do a lot of ending and relisting. So I'll just every few weeks, I will end 200 to 300 listings, old listings, and just relist them. It's a good way to make the eBay algorithm more aware of those listings. Sometimes if they're just sitting for months and months, it feels like eBay forgets that they're there. And so it's a great way to sell older stuff, is to end the listings and then sell similar. Actually, selling similar and relisting on eBay is the exact same thing. I've heard some resellers talk about how those are different. But through the eBay API, they're actually the exact same endpoint. They do the exact same thing. So there's different on the front end when you're looking at eBay. One says relist, one says sell similar, but they do the exact same thing. So, and then, okay, so so best approach to selling old inventory. So beyond just ending and relisting, I'll do promotions, just run a promotion. I'll send best offers. I'll lower the price, I'll do all sorts of things. But at the end of the day, there's very little you can do as a seller to create demand for inventory when it's not there. And so if you have old stuff that's just not selling, check the supply versus the demand. See if there's a ton of competition and see how many have sold over the last 90 days. Sometimes you just have stuff that's not going to sell, or it's going to take a long time to sell. And I guess the only thing you can do is really mark the price down super low to sort of create an artificial market for it. But generally, there's only so much you can do if you're trying to sell stuff that doesn't have much demand. So check the demand first, check the supply first, then start to use some of those tricks like using sales and coupons and things like that. Next one here is, what's your process for selling multiple listed items to a buyer if they want to do a bulk deal and discount? So I've done this a couple times. It's not that often. Actually, you go on to say, I've had the buyer purchase them at full price and done a refund for the difference. I've also created a new listing with all the items in one listing. Yeah, I've done both of those as well. I don't know that there's a great way to do this. Both of those are valid ways to do it. I don't know that one's better than the other. But yeah, I think I guess I would prefer to just have people buy it at full price and then do a refund. I think I've tried to do that in the past, and people feel like it's a little sketchy. Like, oh, is this person actually going to give me a refund? What are the advantages of upgrading to an eBay store, and when should I consider doing it? So I answered that a little bit earlier. I really need to do a video on this. Again, I think there's two advantages of an eBay store from my perspective. One, you get a quarterly $50, or for whatever store I have, I get $50 every quarter for shipping supplies. That's not an advantage, but it's a nice perk, I guess, of having a store, is that eBay will give you a little bit of money to spend on shipping materials like boxes and things like that. But just, having more listings, a larger allotment of listings per month is why I do it. Again, not because I'm listing that much per month, but because I'm regularly ending and relisting. Truthfully, I have not done the math to sit down and think oh, is this actually worth it? Am I generating more money from the value that having a store brings than I would be if I didn't? I should probably do that. And I think if I make a video on that, I will do that. And actually, so I can give you all a really legitimate recommendation. So I don't feel comfortable saying yes, definitely have a store, or don't. I feel like if you get to a certain level, you just don't want to think about whether you have enough listings in your allotment. And so you should just pay for it, just so you can not have to worry about that. It's not that expensive. I think it's $50 a month. And so that's one sale a month. And so when you're doing a certain scale, I feel like you might as well. But again, don't trust me. You should look into it yourself. I'll try to do a video that actually breaks it all down for you. Do you physically drop packages off at the post office daily, or do you have them collected? I used to do the post office has like a pickup service where you can schedule a pickup. I just sort of got self-conscious about it because I would start to have like, 2 or 3 packages. Like, okay, it's fine. They don't mind picking that up. Then it would be like 5 or 6. I'm like, is that annoying for my mail carrier? And then it was like, I'm doing like 10, 12 packages a day. It's like, this doesn't feel right. I feel like I'm abusing the system by requesting pickups all the time. So we do daily drop-offs every day, and it seems fine. We have a post office that's near our kids' school. Again, my wife does the shipping, so she generally is dropping off these days. Sometimes I do, but yeah, it's just a part of our routine. We ship, we drop them off, and it works out pretty well. All right, there's a handful of questions that are all very related around like finding inventory. So I'm gonna go through these and then just talk about it generally. So, hey Justin, so I'm 18. I thought it'd be a great way to make money. Yes, it is. Like, reselling is a great way, especially for, younger folks who are, out there and have some extra time and maybe don't want to work a traditional job. I definitely recommend reselling, but that's not what you're asking. You're asking, I want to know if you ever have problems finding inventory. There's another question here. How do you source so much inventory to make your business profitable? Another person saying, I feel like I need to go beyond thrift stores in order to get better quality products consistently. What do you suggest I do to expand my operation? Have you purchased storage lockers for inventory? Do you hit a lot of garage sales or estate sales? How can an eBay seller scale up? All of these are super related, and it tells me that I should probably like make more videos and content that's like about this in particular. I do have a couple videos that if y'all haven't seen, I'll link to them, and I think that you'll like them. But one of them where I talk about beating thrift stores at their own game, about how to really like expand your knowledge of what's valuable. I just did a recent video. They're like all blur together. I can't remember the videos that I'm doing. I'll link to all of them below where I talk about how to, it's called like how to source inventory like a pro. I think that's what it's called. So I have some videos on this. If you haven't seen them, check them out because I go into detail about a lot of these, but I'm happy to answer them anyway here. I definitely have problems finding inventory. Like I can't make inventory appear out of nowhere magically. If you're looking to scale up, you're going to hit a wall. Like you just will. There's only so much time in the day, and there's only so much inventory you can find by going out and hunting garage sales or flea markets or thrift stores. I happen to really love doing that. I just enjoy going out and doing it. So even if I'm getting like truckloads of inventory elsewhere, I'm still going to be going out and hunting at garage sales and thrift stores and whatnot, just because I really enjoy doing it. But you're going to hit a ceiling. I don't know what that ceiling is. Like, I'm not saying you'll make no money, but I've consistently grossed, $10,000 a month simply by getting inventory that way. So the ceiling is relatively high, but there is a ceiling because you'll just run out of time. And so what I do is I supplement sort of the fun inventory, going out to garage sales and thrift stores with what I would consider like less fun, which is like, getting I bought a pallet of Kohler returns. I got a pallet of like, hundreds of Converse shoes. I got 1,200 Nike WNBA shirts. These things that are just, they're going to sell, they're going to make money. I like making money. That's why I'm doing this, but they're not really fun. I'm not out there hunting. I'm not out there like discovering stuff, but it's a nice way to like pad it and to increase your, to scale your business more. So my recommendation is that, if you love thrifting, if you love going to garage sales, keep doing that. Recognize that there's, ultimately you're going to hit a ceiling and you're probably going to want to find inventory elsewhere, and work on bulk deals, work on finding ways to find larger quantities of inventory. That has the benefit of also being less, your cost of goods is generally lower, the more you're buying. You do have to have more cash up front. So all of those bulk deals that I've bought, like the Kohler pallets and the shoes and the Nike stuff, and I'm paying like thousands of dollars for those things. So it's a little bit more risky, and you have to have some cash up front that you're not necessarily going to get back right away, right? You're going to get it back over time. But that's how you start to scale, is just getting more high quality inventory than you can do as one person going to thrift stores. And so the best way to do that is by buying bulk. How do you find that stuff? Well, if I knew consistent ways to find high quality inventory at scale, like I probably wouldn't be here talking to you right now, right? Like, it's just that's the name of the game. That's what you have to figure out, how to find that stuff. How I've found it is by making personal connections, like the Nike deal I found on Facebook. I saw, a listing for a bunch of hats. And so I reached out to this woman. I was like, "Oh, do you have more of these?" And she's like, "Yeah, sure." And so I ended up going over to her house, and I don't know where she got this stuff, but she had just like pallets of Nike stuff. And so we worked out a deal and I bought it. And that's been like a consistent source for me where every few months I'll get stuff from her, that she's done with. She's sick of selling it or whatever. That's just me going out and talking to people. And so that's the first thing I would recommend is just go out and talk to people. Tell them you're a reseller, tell them what you do. Eventually you'll find people who are in this space as well and who are getting inventory. And, if you show up with cash and you cart stuff away for them, like they'll be happy about it. And so that's what I recommend. All right. And so the last question here is, do you notice an uptick in sales during the holiday season? If so, is there anything you do to prepare for that to take full advantage of the increase in sales? Definitely. Q4 is by far the biggest of all the quarters. And, because of Christmas, usually, for me, my sales start to tick up usually like around October, late October, early November. So we're already in the thick of it right now. Again, I've not been a good reseller. Especially this Q4, my sales are definitely ticking up. You could see, I'll just show a graph here. You can see I'm selling more stuff. It's great. But really like the best way to prepare, it's really no different than any other part of the year though. It's just like find a bunch of high quality inventory and list as much of it as possible. And it's just extra important during Q4 because there's more people buying stuff. That's how you prepare. Make sure you have enough boxes in stock. Make sure you have enough tape in stock. Make sure you're ready to go because you're just generally going to be selling more stuff in Q4 than you will in Q1, Q2, and Q3. So that's how you prep. That's how you prepare. It's no different than any other part of the year other than the stakes are higher because there's more people out there. So the more inventory you can get and the more you can list, the better you're going to be off. What are your goals? Not just financially, but what do you hope to achieve on a personal level by being a reseller? So good question. I'm a big fan of goal setting. As if you've watched my videos, you probably know I talk a lot about setting goals and the importance of setting goals. Originally, when I first started reselling, my goal was to basically make enough money on the side to sustain my family if I were to lose my primary income through my main job. That was my goal. I wanted to make sure that I had some system in place where I could generate enough money that if something went wrong and I lost my job, I would have something to fall back on. And so I talk about this in some other videos. I can't remember which video specifically. I'll link one of them up here above. But yeah, I talk about how to set those goals, how to think about it. For me, I did a lot of calculations to figure out how much it costs my family to sustain itself, how much money we spent every month. And then I did all the calculations for that. Then I figured out how much it would take to actually generate that much money from reselling on eBay, did all those calculations. And that was my goal, is to make that much money. And so my goals are different now. Truthfully, I don't make that much money on eBay or as I did before. I used to make more money, and that's because I'm spending less time on eBay and instead more time on other ventures like YouTube. That eats into my listing time and my eBay time. I'm building an app on the side. Still have my full-time job. So I have a lot of different things going on, and therefore I'm not making as much money on eBay. And so my goals over time have evolved. They're just not really what they used to be, and it's not specific to eBay only. And so, but my goals are really rooted in the same sort of philosophical approach of sustaining my family and having financial independence and freedom and time to do what I want, and spending my time the way that I want to. And so what comes with that is, for me, having a bunch of different income streams, a bunch of different ways of making money, not necessarily having to work a full-time job. I still work a full-time job because I want to, but if I didn't want to, or if I couldn't for whatever reason, I want to have a good safety net and alternatives and ways to make money in other ways. So those are my goals now. All right, let's go on to the next one. Hey, Justin, can you give us an idea of year one, how many listings you were doing, year two, year three, and how you scaled your business, like your progressive improvements, your steps? I think it would be cool to see how you've been able to build over time with specific data you could show. Probably not going to show much data in this video. I kind of just answer these questions off the cuff, and so I'm not going to do too much data, but there's really no secret here. It was slow incremental progress over time is how I built everything up. And so I literally started with nothing in inventory and no listings, and I set goals on listing certain amount of items per day, and I would do that until I grew it all the way up to I have I usually keep about 1,000 items in stock now. But that just accumulated over time. The first year, I would say I probably hit my listing goal. It probably took a full year to get up there. So yeah, other than just like being consistent, taking it one day at a time, making sure that I'm hitting my goals every day, and eventually you'll look back and be like, oh my gosh, like I did all of this. Now I have 1,000 things in stock, and I'm making $5,000 a month or whatever it is. And so no real trick other than that. It's just being consistent, setting goals, and sticking with it, and having discipline. That's basically what I did. All right, next on the list. I'm interested in learning about using flat rate shipping boxes from USPS and how to begin using them to ship out sales. So I have an entire video on shipping. I'll link to that. It's a little bit old. In fact, I did the video before first class shipping went away and it changed to Ground Advantage. So there's some inaccuracies in that video, but it's still useful, I think. And in that video, I talk about flat rate shipping and when you should and shouldn't use it. And my general rule is that flat rate shipping in a box, in one of the USPS boxes, is almost never worth it. The envelopes, on the other hand, you have like padded envelopes and regular flat rate envelopes. Those can definitely be worth it. If you can fit your items into that, into those envelopes, often it can be cheaper than shipping at regular priority. But very rarely have I found a situation where using a flat rate box is cheaper than just shipping it priority or Ground Advantage. Unless the item that you have is extremely heavy and small, then flat rate shipping in a box is almost never going to be useful. But use those flat rate envelopes; those can definitely be worth it. Okay, next one. So these are two about listing. I'll group them together. How long does it take you to photo and list an item from start to finish? Do you iron or steam your clothes before photos? The second question here is, when listing items, do you find similar sold comps and click sell similar, and then use their listings, or do you create a unique listing each time? So I'll answer that in the reverse. So yes, I do click sell similar 99.9% of the time. That's the way that I do it. I'm going to do a video probably next week where I go through my entire listing process beginning to end. I've got it down to a science at this point, and I can list almost anything in like 3 to 4 minutes, including photos and inventory management and all of that. So I'll definitely plan on doing a video on that so you can see a little bit more about my listing process specifically, but it definitely involves clicking and using sell similar versus creating a new listing from scratch. The only time I ever create a new listing from scratch is if there's no comps, there's no old listings that I can steal from, but 99.9% of the time there is. The second question was around how long did it take you to photo and list an item from start to finish? So I have a separate video that talks about photos specifically. Just the photo process, I would say, is about 60 to 90 seconds of my 3 to 4 minutes listing process. And so, I'll save it for that other video. I'm not going to go into my full listing process, but yeah, it doesn't take me very long to list or take photos. And I use my phone to take photos. I'll link above to the video about me taking photos, and look for another video about my entire listing process coming in the next few weeks or so. All right, let's move on to the next one here. How often do you judge your buyer by their ratings, whether they have bad reviews or maybe no reviews at all? I find myself turning down offers almost every time. By the way, I 3x my monthly income on eBay because of you. Thanks so much. You're welcome. It's awesome to see these results playing out and impacting other people's businesses. So super cool. Thanks for sharing. To answer your question, I never judge a buyer by their ratings. I literally never look at it. I never check, never see. I just don't care. Even people who have no buying history, maybe they have, I know you can check the feedback that buyers have left for other sellers, but I never do. And I would suggest you do the same. I mean, everyone's money is worth the same amount. Obviously, there's like bad buyers out there, but I don't know. I'm selling thousands and thousands of items, every year. I'm not about to start checking, the feedback and all that of anyone who's sending me an offer, all that. It's just, to me, that seems like a waste of time. And I just don't have many problems. Like I do have, there's bad buyers out there. Whether I'm checking their feedback or not, I don't think that's going to make a huge difference. And I would guess that you could change that 3xing of your monthly income on eBay to 4x if you start accepting offers without checking. And so that's what I recommend. You're going to find a bad egg every once in a while, but they're few and far between. Even people that have no feedback, totally fine for me. Okay. Next one, there's a couple questions on variations. So by that, like listing variations, which is a type of listing you can do on eBay. It says, do you ever use variation listings? Yes, I do. I've used them in the past, and they can be very confusing and either lead to a ton of sales or just a complete waste of day. What are your thoughts? I use them when it's necessary. And so really the only times I use it is when I have multiple quantities of an item and I have like different sizes or different colors. And so variations are a way that you can create a single listing for multiple products that have variations in those products. And so let's say you buy a pack of 100 t-shirts that all have the same logo on them, but they're all in different sizes, and you have 50 larges, 25 smalls, 30 mediums, whatever. You can do, instead of having like 100 different listings, you can have one listing and have multiple quantities across different variations. And so that's the purpose of using that. I don't know that it's ever impacted my sales in the positive or negative. It's just, to me, it's just like a way of listing stuff, not necessarily a way to increase or decrease sales. And so it has not really led to a ton of sales or not a ton of sales. I don't think I can say. It's just, it's been a way for me to manage my inventory on eBay in a better way. And so I don't do them that often because I don't have that type of inventory typically, but when I do, it works fine, and I sell stuff. So I think it's okay. The second question is, I see some sellers have a range price. I'm guessing it's because they're selling multiple of an item and they have different prices. How do you set up a listing like that? So that is a variation listing, most likely. When you see that variation in price, that just means likely that there is differences in prices based on the variation. So again, to use that t-shirt example, maybe you have, for some reason, the extra large is going to cost more than the smalls. You can set the pricing at the variations at different levels. And when you do that, the prices show up as a variable or like a range. And so I'm pretty sure that's what this person is asking about. Okay, next question. When getting a big lot of items, either from pallets or garage sales, do you immediately log all items in your inventory? And if so, how do you deal with things that you decide later to sell as a bundle or a lot? That's a super good question. So I do buy a lot of, or big lot of items, like a pallet or a lot of things from garage sales. I do that pretty regularly. I do not inventory first. So my inventory process happens as a part of the listing process. So once an item is listed, that's when I inventory it. So that's when I add it to inventory. So I don't have the problem that this person is asking about, like dealing with things that I decide later to sell as a bundle, because I don't put it in inventory until I've already made that decision. So it's not an issue. The only complexity with the way that I do it is I just have to remember, how much I paid for something. And so it's usually not an issue for me. For whatever reason, I can just remember how much I paid for stuff. And so even if I go to a garage sale and buy 25 things and wait 2 weeks to list them, generally I still remember how much I paid for them. And a lot of stuff I get from thrift stores, which have the price tags on them. And so it works out well for me to not inventory stuff beforehand. And so that's how I do it. All right, next, do you adjust prices to run promotions, coupon sales? Do you use a calendar or strategy for managing sales in your store? So no, I don't really do any of that stuff regularly. Of course, I've run promotions and run sales occasionally, but it's just not a part of my strategy in any way. I just don't do it very often. Sometimes I'll remember to do it every once in a while, and I'll do it, and it'll be okay. But I don't know. It's just not something I do regularly. I do adjust prices occasionally. So usually what I do is I get into a cycle of like delisting and then relisting. And when I do that, typically I'll go through and I'll just like take a batch of 200 items. I'll remove their active listings, and then I will sell similar on all those active listings in the bulk tool. And then I will adjust the prices, or I'll review the prices as a part of that process, and then adjust them if necessary, usually lowering them just to get them to sell more quickly. But again, I don't do that with any sort of regular cadence. It's like once every few months, I'm like, yeah, it's feeling about time to turn over a couple hundred things in my store, and I'll do it as a part of that. Okay. If a buyer asks to ship items together to save on shipping costs, how do you set that up for them? So it's a good question. This definitely happens occasionally. There maybe is an official way to do it. I'll tell you how I do it, which is, so sometimes when that happens, it comes in to eBay as a single transaction with two different items. And in those cases, it's relatively easy to just ship that using one label. Sometimes, though, it comes in as two separate orders. And I guess this has to do with how the buyer actually purchases those items. Sometimes they make two separate transactions, or other times they add it to a shopping cart and then make one transaction. I think that's what I'm guessing. But in the cases where it's two transactions, you buy a label only for one, but you want to ship them together. And so what I do in those situations is, buy the label for one of them using the weights and measures for both of them in a single box, and buy the label. And then I take the tracking number and copy it from that one, and I paste it into the shipping label field on the second item, and mark that one as shipped manually. And so, truthfully, maybe there's a better way to do that. Maybe my way might not be the best way, but that's the way that I do it. So, proceed with caution. I would do some research, make sure you're doing it the right way, but I'm pretty sure the way I do it's fine. I guess there's a chance where somebody could say, that the second item didn't show up or something. Maybe, I don't know. I've never run into that problem, but there's always edge cases that people can try to get you on, but I think you'll be fine doing it that way. Okay, let's see. Where are we? Best way to form longer-term relationships with larger suppliers, supply methods. Not really my territory too much. And I've built relationships with people at like flea markets that I go to regularly, and thrift stores, just to be friendly and help each other out. Not really doing big bulk deals in that scenario. I have a few scenarios where I've met people off of Facebook Marketplace who are liquidating inventory, and I've just established those and maintained those relationships. And but those are like completely random. I have not made that a part of my strategy. They just happened. And so, I don't know. Best way to form long-term relationships, I think, just like being open and honest with what you do with the people that you meet, and you might have the opportunity to connect, from a reselling perspective with people if they know what you do. And so that's what I would suggest. What size store do you need to become a full-time seller? That's a good question, but it's totally dependent on the individual. And so my question to you would be, how much money do you need to make to make this a full-time thing? Start with that, figure out that number, and then, break it down from that and figure out, how much you would have to sell in order to actually make that much, and what, how much time that would take, and figure out if that works into your particular lifestyle. Pretty hard to answer, in a generic way. There's no like, oh, if you hit X amount, you're all of a sudden a full-time reseller. It just totally depends, So if it costs your family $10,000 a month, to survive, there you go. That's how much it's going to take for you to be a full-time reseller. If it only costs your family $2,000 a month, then, it's a little bit easier. So figure that out first. Figure out how much it takes for you to sustain your family or yourself, and see if you can build that up to do it full-time. All right. Should I be patient or drop my prices if sales are slow for the week? It's a good question. Dropping prices is definitely going to help sell things slightly faster, probably. But really, you got to think about the demand that your items have in the market. And so, if your item has very little demand, not a whole lot of adjusting prices, unless you go super low, is going to increase the demand. And so it really just depends on what you're selling. I tend to not look at things on like a super narrow scale, like a day or a week, because some things just take longer to sell. And so, especially if you have thousands of things in your inventory, you can't be like micromanaging every single listing on a weekly basis to see if it sells. And so, what was I think I'm like rambling here and don't even remember the question exactly. Should I be patient or drop yeah. So, I would say be patient, but work to understand the demand that your items have first. And so you can check demand just by looking up and seeing how many active comps there are, how many existing active listings there are that match the listing that you have. And then doing the same on the sold, checking sold comps as well. And so the number of active, that's your competition, that's the supply. And the number of sold items is the demand. And so if you're selling something, that has relatively low demand and really high supply, it's just going to take a long time to sell. And so lowering the price is not going to do anything. However, if the thing you're trying to sell has really high or really low supply and really high demand, and it's not selling, well, then yeah, it's probably a pricing problem. And so totally depends on what you're selling. Check the sell-through rate, check the supply and demand, and then sort of make a decision on whether you should just be patient or whether you should drop the price. Okay, do you need to form a business with your state to resell, or can you just resell as a person? I would encourage you to check your local laws. I'm not familiar with laws across every state. I could say with pretty good confidence that, if you're just like looking to buy stuff and resell it on eBay, you don't need like a reselling license to do that. In my state, you do need a reselling license if you want to buy as a I forget what it's called, like as a vendor or something, but not have to pay sales tax on those purchases. You have to be a licensed reseller. I don't source stuff that way, so I don't do it. I have no sort of reselling license or anything personally, and as far as I know, I don't need to have one. If that's different, I should probably find that out. You could let me know, but yeah, I think the answer is most likely no, but you should do some research in your state in particular. Okay, what are you using for record keeping? Just a basic Excel spreadsheet. So yeah, I started off just doing a basic Excel spreadsheet or a Google Sheet spreadsheet and used that for, 6 months or so until the stuff I was trying to track was getting to be a little bit difficult in Excel. And so I moved over to Airtable. And Airtable is kind of like Excel, but with some database functionality. And that was a little bit easier for me to sort of crunch the data in the ways and organize the data in the ways that I was trying to do for my reselling business. And so I've been using Airtable for a long time, but it still requires a lot of manual data entry. It's not connected to any sort of marketplaces or, it's just everything has to be done manually. And so over the past few months this summer, I've been working on an app that does everything that Excel or Airtable in this case does for managing inventory and sales data, but automates all of it so that I don't have to do any manual data entry. And so getting pretty close to having that ready to be done. I'm currently using it. I do need help though from like some people that may be interested in also using it as like a beta tester. And so if you're interested, let me know. I'll put a link in the description below where you can just sort of give me your email address so I can reach out when that's ready. If you're interested in doing that. So it would be helpful for me if you were. So that's what I'm using. All right, how many hours a week do you spend sourcing on average? So I broke this down in one of my other videos exactly. I'm trying to remember what I said then. I'll just tell you right now, I'm not sourcing a ton as I normally do right now. And so let's see, every Tuesday I source for an hour, or I guess it's like 30 to 45 minutes. I go to the same thrift store every Tuesday. Every Saturday I go to garage sales, usually from like 7 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. ish. So that's 2.5 hours. So let's call it 3 hours total. And then every Sunday I go to a flea market for about an hour. So that's 4 hours. So right now I'm doing 4 hours every week. Sometimes that's a lot more, sometimes it's less, but that's where I'm sitting right now is 4 hours of sourcing per week. International shipping, is it worth it? Yeah, for sure. I use eBay's global shipping program, or they just changed the name of it. I don't remember what it is, but it's effectively the same thing where when you sell something internationally, instead of sending it directly to the buyer, you send it to eBay first and they inspect it and they handle all of the customs and forms and all that stuff and send it to the buyer on your behalf. And I think it's a great program. And so I love selling internationally, actually. It probably makes up 25 to 30% of my sales. That's not an exact, I'm just guessing. But it's really great because you're only responsible for getting it to the eBay warehouses. Once it gets there, like literally eBay does the rest. And if there's any problems, they refund the buyer, not you. And so I've had situations where I sell something and send it to eBay and they inspect it and send it back off to the buyer and it gets broken and eBay covers it in that situation. And so when I see an international sale, I'm very happy because it just usually means less risk. And so yes, definitely international shipping is worth it if you're using the global shipping program or whatever it's called these days. So, okay. Last one. Would you consider doing a sourcing video where you are actually out in the thrift store showing us what to look for and what to leave behind? Maybe, I guess. It's not really my style. I like watching that type of content. I like that content a lot, but I don't know. It's not really my style to strap a GoPro on and go to a thrift store. So I wouldn't rule it out, but right now it's just not really the type of content that I'm creating. So probably not, but we'll see in the future. Handyman Wooly asks, do you ever remove listings of items that don't sell or remove any items that don't seem to get views? If so, what determines the removal? So that's a good question. I have a pretty large space to deal with my inventory, so I don't care too much about holding on to stuff for a long time, but I do go back in my inventory and sort of clean it up and go through it and check and make sure that this is stuff that is still worth keeping and selling. Here's typically what I do is I just will grab a box off of my shelf like this, and I will take it over and I'll look through it and I will pull up my inventory management system, Flipwise, and I will check that storage location. I use this opportunity to make sure all of my inventory is correct. If there's not stuff that isn't not listed anymore or that is listed that I don't have anymore. And so it's a good opportunity to just do a double check on your inventory, make sure everything looks good. But then I'll look and see like these things, okay, I've had this for a long time. This thing was originally listed, 6 months ago, 8 months ago, 12 months ago. I might check and see why it hasn't sold yet. Is it because the sell-through rate has dropped off? Is it because I have it priced wrong? That type of thing. And then if it is something that I just think, this is just not going to sell, this was a bad buy, I should just get it out of my inventory, I will just end the listing and then mark it as donated in Flipwise. And so every few weeks I pick a box and I do this with it, and over time I get through all of my inventory. I don't do it every day or anything. I do it maybe once a month at most. Zach asks, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but I put 3 listings for auctions on eBay and 2 of the 3 just didn't pay after winning the auction. What's up with that? I was trying to get rid of consoles and it's taking forever because I have to put in a 7-day auction several times. Yeah, that sucks. That's one of the really bad things about running auctions on eBay is that so often buyers just don't actually pay for the item, and then you got to relist it and rerun the auction, and you're trying to sell a console. It ends up taking 3, 4, 5 weeks just to actually get somebody to bid on it who's actually going to pay for it. Instead, you want to be using buy it nows almost all the time instead of auctions because of that very reason. With buy it nows, you can require immediate payment. There's really 3 rules that I follow about when you should use an auction. You should use an auction on an item if it has low supply, high demand, and an unknown market value. And so low supply means there's not a whole lot of competitors out there competing listings. High demand means there's a lot of buyers that are interested in this type of thing. And an unknown market value means you just don't quite know how to price it. If you try to run an auction for something that has high supply and low demand, you're just not going to get any bidders, or worse, you'll get one bidder and it'll sell for way less than it is actually worth. And if you already know the market value, the best thing to do is just list it at that market value. Otherwise, you run an auction, you're going to go through the whole mess that you're talking about of having to relist it and until you get somebody to actually pay for it. But also you risk just getting less than the market value. And so there are things that I do run on auctions on occasion, but it is not very frequent based on the stuff that I sell. If you have very rare, unique items that are difficult to price and have a lot of interest, people are a lot of interest in them, and there's not a lot of supply out there, run auctions all the time. But if you don't, if you're just selling a console, those things have very well-known market values. They have high supply and they have high demand. So just list it at the right price and wait for a buyer. That way, it'll remove a lot of headaches for you. JT asks, what's your best sale ever in terms of net return? How about a favorite or most memorable sale regardless of profit? That's a good question. Let's check. I don't really know. I don't remember. So I'll just pull up Flipwise here and we'll look at sold all time and we'll sort by net return. In the reverse. Yeah, so my most profitable item here is this Swiss-made Atmos clock that I bought for $130 and it sold for $1,224.99 with a net return of $866.02. So I actually bought this from another reseller a couple years ago who was getting out of the business, and I bought all of his inventory. This was one of the centerpieces of that inventory. I knew it was going to be a valuable piece. And yeah, it ended up, netting $866 on that for my best flip ever. The most memorable one, that's an interesting question. I think, if I'm just going off my gut, the one that comes to my mind first is a book, actually. I had just spent some time on YouTube learning how to identify first editions and first prints of books. And like 2 days later, after I just watched this video, I was at a garage sale and I saw a book that I recognized. And so I, picked it up and I looked at it and I was like, oh yeah, look, it does look like it is a first edition. So I just bought, it was like 75 cents or $1 or something like that. And I get it back to the car and I look it up and I was just like completely floored at what I saw for eBay comps. The book was the very first Game of Thrones, and this ended up being a first edition, first printing of the book. And so I spent like 75 cents or $1 on this book, and it ended up selling in the $600 range, somewhere around there. It was not even in perfect condition either. Had some rips on the dust jacket, and there was some staining on the pages, but even so, it still sold for over $600. I don't have it in Flipwise, unfortunately. This was like 6 or 7 years ago before Flipwise existed, but it was just that sticks out. It was just such a crazy find. I was so lucky that I had learned, a few days prior how to identify first edition books. And then here we go. I still have never found a first edition book that was even close to that valuable, but it was a really cool one to find and super exciting to see it. And that's what sticks out as a memorable one for me. Heather asks, stupid question. What do sales have to do with listing new inventory? I'm super new within the last week, so sorry for a dumb question. There's no dumb questions out there unless they're related to pizza, so no worries. So what does listing new inventory have to do with sales? Well, you can't sell anything unless you're listing things. And so that's the big connection there, is that you just have to be in the habit of listing as much as you possibly can if you want to sell as much as you possibly can. With eBay, it's a little more finicky than that. eBay really likes it when you're an active seller, when you're listing frequently. I often suggest that you come up with a minimum daily number of listings that you can do and stick to that every single day, because eBay really likes that consistency. In my experience, you're more likely to get sales if you're consistently listing versus listing one big batch of items once a month, for example. That's really the connection with listing and sales that I'm talking about there, is just go out and list as much as you possibly can if you want to get a bunch of sales. Dan asks, Justin, I found your channel and I'm enjoying your content. Thank you. I have a question. You mentioned that you do estimated measurements for your items since you do flat rate shipping. Does this cause you problems with respect to when items sell through the eBay International Standard Delivery Program? Does eBay ever give you feedback that you undercharge or overcharge for shipping, or penalize you for your gaps in your estimation? That's a super good question. I have often wondered this. What Dan's asking is, when you sell something through the International Shipping Program, you don't actually send it to the end buyer in some other country. You send it to eBay first, they inspect it, they repackage it, and then they ship it off to the end buyer. And so what Dan's asking is what is Dan asking? I've already forgotten. Estimated measurements. So when I list stuff on eBay, I don't put any measurements in there at all. I either build the cost to ship into the list price and offer free shipping, or I do like a flat rate shipping on top, but I don't put any measurements in there at all. Early on, when I was first using the international shipping program, I started to wonder, if this sells internationally, how does eBay know how much to charge the international buyer for shipping if I'm not putting any shipping information in there? I don't know what they do. I have no idea how eBay handles that. All I can tell you is that to you as the seller, it just doesn't matter. Having accurate measurements on your items on your listing does not impact the international sale at all in any way. Sometime in the last year, I sold an old vintage Apple monitor that weighed like 50 pounds, and it went to Australia, and I had no measurements or details or weights or anything in the listing at all, and everything was completely fine. And so I don't know what they do. I don't know how. Maybe eBay has their own internal weights and measures associated with listings that isn't visible to the user, but I can just tell you, you don't have to specify anything. You don't have to be accurate there, and it's not going to impact the international shipping program at all. Rudy asks, hey Justin, love the channel. Thank you. Yard sale question. How long after the start time of a yard sale are you still willing to shop? For example, if a sale started at 7 a.m., would you still go check it out even if you aren't arriving until 9? I try to get to sales as close to the start time as possible, and I've tended to avoid sales if I couldn't hit them close to start. Would love knowing your Saturday strategy. Thanks. Yeah, happy to share my Saturday strategy there. Obviously, with garage sales, the sooner you can get there, the better, because you have free pick of everything that's available. And the longer you wait, that means the more people that are going out and potentially picking up things that you would have picked up also. I tend to stop going to garage sales right around 10 a.m., mostly just because I'm kind of sick of going. I usually start at 7 a.m., so for me, 3 hours is enough for one day. But throughout that time, I find good quality inventory, and it doesn't really matter. And this really goes back to improving your knowledge of what has value. If you're looking for video games, you're not going to find them after 7:15, just because chances are a reseller is going to go to a garage sale and pick up highly valuable, highly in demand, very obvious things that are good for reselling. Expand your knowledge. The more you know about what has value beyond the obvious, the longer you can extend your time at garage sales and still find profitable items. So I definitely still find profitable items all the way up until 10 a.m. when I'm usually done. Kim asks, I've heard of people using private auctions or low-cost auctions to send items to family and friends and take advantage of the shipping discounts. Is that something eBay might frown upon? That's an interesting question. I've never heard that before. I don't think eBay would frown upon it because ultimately you're giving them money, even if it is a very small amount, so why not? But there's really no reason to buy and sell something through eBay for the sole purpose of getting their shipping discount, because you can get that level of shipping discount in other ways that don't involve having to run things as sales and pay fees to eBay. And that's by using a third-party shipping label provider like Pirate Ship or Shippo. Both of those, and there's other ones too, offer shipping rate discounts that are competitive with eBay, if not better sometimes. There's really no reason you would need to list your items and sell them on eBay just to get the shipping discount, because you can just buy them directly from somewhere like Pirate Ship. Way She Goes Gaming asks, how long does a shipping discount last? Example, eBay gives you a discount if you buy the label through eBay for large items. I usually choose a carrier like UPS or FedEx. When that large item sold, I swear it costed substantially more than was quoted in the discount when posted. This item took a while to sell. I'm curious if the discount became void due to time. That's an interesting question. I think so. What this viewer is referring to is that shipping discount you get through eBay, but you don't get that discount until you actually ship the item. And there's really no expiration on it. eBay just has a deal with all of these carriers where they get a reduced rate for shipping. And, if you were quoted some price to ship when you listed it and that price changed over time, that is probably because the weights and measures you used at the time of listing changed from the time when you sold it. Or if it was a really long time, rates do go up. I think Post Office just announced 2 rate increases. It could be that the rates just went up, but there's no concept of your shipping discount expiring that I know of. You get that discount at the time of purchasing the label, not when you list the item originally. So I don't think it would be a case of a discount expiring. Alexander asks, when you delete and sell similar items, will you do that for items with watchers? I've been selling for a couple years and watchers always seem worth keeping. So Alexander's referring to the concept of ending an item and then relisting it, which is a good practice to do for really old items, to end it and then relist it. It's debatable whether it does anything. I personally think it does help increase the visibility of items in search by ending it and relisting it. But Alexander's asking, should you do that if your items have watchers on them? I still do it even when my items have watchers on it. I don't think watchers mean a whole lot. If I go to my Seller Hub right now, I'm sure that there are listings that are months old that have 50, 60, 70 watchers. Watchers just are not necessarily an indicator of sales. Sometimes it is, but not always. And I sell plenty of things with 0 watchers, and plenty of things sit there with tons of watchers and don't sell. So I just don't think it really matters. I end and relist. Those watchers will come back. And so that's what I would recommend. Not worry about the watchers. All right, Randman asks, hey Justin, love the channel. Thanks. I sell low-end sports cards and I'm curious why a lot of my listings don't get views till after a few days. Or if I do get views, no one buys or sends offers even when I'm competitively priced. Am I doing something wrong? I don't know that you're necessarily doing something wrong, but you do need to understand the supply and demand of the items that you're selling. And so if you have items in your inventory that just aren't selling, you should really check and see what the supply is. Look at that item, search for it under active listings on eBay, see how many other active listings there are out there. That's your competition, that's the supply. And then switch that over to the sold filter and see how many of that exact same item have sold. And that will give you a good understanding of supply versus demand and sell-through rate. So if this item has hundreds of listings and only a couple have sold over the last 90 days, well, it wouldn't be surprising that yours has not sold yet or yours doesn't have any views because yours is lost in a sea of competition and there's not many buyers coming along to buy it. But if you check that and there's not a whole lot listed, but a lot have sold, then that could mean there is something that you're doing wrong in your listing. Maybe your pictures aren't good, maybe your title's messed up, maybe you're missing some keywords. Not necessarily doing anything wrong, but you should just try to understand the sell-through rate of what you're selling. And if something isn't selling, seek to understand that so that you can set your expectations accordingly for how long it'll take to sell. Baiju Bug asks, hi Justin, love your videos. Learn something new on every video. Thank you. My question is, how do you determine how much of your profits you use for new inventory? Do you have a percentage you use from your last month's sales? That's a good question. That's a really hard thing to determine. It depends a lot on your own specific business. Personally, I do this part-time, and so I'm not using the profits that I make to live off of. If I did, I would need to be a little bit more particular about how much money I spent on new inventory because I might be not able to pay my bills, for example. And so if you're using eBay money to live off of, then you need to be a little bit more careful. You need to understand what your total monthly costs are for your family, and you need to make sure that those things are paid before you're reinvesting any of the leftovers back into new inventory. But if you're doing this part-time where it matters a little bit less, you can do what I do, which is just invest as much as you possibly can back into new inventory. I kind of operate under the idea that I never want to pass up a good opportunity to buy quality inventory. Whether I'm out at a thrift store or a garage sale or doing a bulk deal, I just want to be in a position where I have enough funds in my account, in my reselling account, to where I can afford to make a good purchase when I need to. And that really hasn't failed me so far. I typically keep, a couple $1,000s in my reselling account at any given time. And, sometimes I'll go on a vacation, so I'll pull a lot of those funds out and I'll kind of have to start fresh and build it up. And that does, limit my ability to invest in new inventory. But I don't take a percentage off the top, for example. Wouldn't be a bad idea to just say like, hey, if you take 15% off the top of all the money coming back to you for eBay and set that aside for taxes, and then take another 10%, set that aside for new inventory, and kind of grow a little nest egg of money you can spend on new inventory. I'm not that particular. I just sort of wing it, but you could do it that way if you want to. Ms. Kit Harayat asks, do you respond to buyer messages and provide customer support? How much time does it take? So yeah, I do respond to buyer messages. I do provide customer support. That's another thing too for new eBay resellers out there, is sometimes they don't realize this is ultimately a customer service job. Your ability to provide good customer service plays a big role in your success. However, I don't answer every question that comes at me. In fact, whenever I get questions on items that can already be answered in the listing, I don't go out of my way to respond to these. I have found that the more questions that people ask about a particular item, the more problems I get if they actually buy the item. And so I don't encourage people to buy my items if they have a bunch of questions about them. And I do that by just not responding to them. In fact, check out this feedback that I got just the other day. I thought it was kind of funny. Item received quickly and in good condition. Only disappointing thing is that I sent a question to the seller twice, but heard no response either time. Bought the item anyway, and it was at least glad it was in the condition I had hoped it was. That's because this person asked a bunch of questions that were already in the listing. And to me, it was sending a signal that, well, if you're not going to pay attention to the listing, if you're not going to inspect the photos closely, you're just going to ask these questions. Are you going to have mismatched expectations about the quality of this thing? Typically in that situation, I might block the buyer. I didn't in this time, and they bought it and it ended up fine. But in those situations, I don't answer questions. The amount of time I spend running customer support for eBay is really low. I mean, it's got to be like 3 minutes a day at most. Quit asks, Justin, thank you for all your down-to-earth real content. You're welcome. I feel like you touched on this with the descriptions and in your last video, but early on in my eBay research, I read that the algorithm wants you to fill out as many item details as possible. How important do you think it is to fill the themes and occasions and all that? Is it necessary? So another good question there. Should you spend the time to fill out all of the details that eBay asks you to on a per product basis? This is really up to you. The way I think about it though is, how are people searching for items? Sorry, there's a helicopter going over. So I think about, how are people actually searching for items? If it's an item that is Halloween related, yeah, it might make sense to use Halloween in the theme of the item descriptions. Otherwise, I don't fill it out with information unless it's super relevant. And if it's already in the title, I typically don't fill it out in the bottom below. So if for some reason my title, I didn't have enough space to fit the word in Halloween, then I would put it in the theme, in the item descriptions down below. But I don't just indiscriminately add all sorts of keywords and all unrelated things, and just as a way to try to trick the algorithm. And that brings me to a really good point here, which is the best hack for the algorithm is not any sort of fine-tuning you can do to your listings or manipulating data or adding extra keywords or any of that. The best thing that you can do to hack the algorithm is to just buy good stuff. Buy quality inventory that has a high sell-through rate, that has ideally a low supply and high demand. That is the best hack you can get, is just buying quality inventory. If you have items that are not selling, it typically is not because the algorithm hates you. It's probably because it's just not an in-demand item. And so if you're having trouble selling stuff and you're looking around on Google or on YouTube trying to find ways to hack the algorithm to get more sales, I just really wouldn't bother doing that. I would try to channel your energy into improving your knowledge of what has value, of going out and sourcing more often, and trying to buy the best quality inventory you can. Ultimately, that's the most important thing with all of this, is buying high quality inventory. And sure, you need to make sure that your listings are optimized and that those are all table stakes. You got to do them. You got to make sure you have good pictures, good titles, good metadata, good descriptions, all that stuff. But like, I would not worry over those details as much as most people do. Instead, worry about buying good, high quality inventory and let eBay do the rest. All right, thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far, YouTube thinks you might like this other video of mine, so check it out.